Chapter 1. A purple crescent moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling down strands of purple brilliance like a purple curtain, rendering the world a mysterious color. In the purple light, a pointed white stone castle stood tall, majestic, and rough. On the balcony of the third floor of the castle, a black-haired young man looked at the purple crescent moon in the night with a bitter smile on his face. He was about 15 or 16 years old, with short black hair and a delicate face with a little immaturity, but in his pair of blue eyes, there was a depth that was different from that of a young man. A cool breeze blew, bringing with it a slight chill. He couldn't help but shiver a little. It was a little cold. Ta-ta-ta. Behind him, there were hurried footsteps approaching. The black-haired young man looked back, and with the help of the light in the castle, he saw a young girl in a black dress and a white apron. The young girl was tall and had fair skin. Her brown hair was tied up with clips, and there was a white bow on her head. This was the standard maid attire. She was holding a white feather cloak in her hand, and there was a trace of anxiety on her face. When she saw the black-haired young man on the balcony, she sighed softly and said, "Young Master Gray, your injuries haven't healed yet, so you can't be exposed to the wind." As she spoke, she had already stepped forward and considerately put the white feather cloak on the black-haired young man. When the young girl's hand touched him, the black-haired young man's body tensed up slightly, but he relaxed again. He looked at the purple moon outside again and said, "I'll go back now." The young girl immediately wanted to help the black-haired young man, but the young man waved his hand and stopped her. He walked into the white stone passageway and walked towards the brightly lit castle. The young man's name was Fergus Gray, and he was the son of the castle's owner, Viscount Fergus. Of course, this was his current identity. In fact, a few days ago, he was still an ordinary office worker. It was a very ordinary night, no different from the busy day of work in the past. But when he woke up, he realized that he was no longer in the small rented apartment. Instead, he appeared in a spacious bedroom with a white feather quilt. His body was no longer his, and at the same time, he had an additional piece of unfamiliar memory. To be honest, he was a little excited about this sudden change at first. Nobles, maids waiting on him, clothes being handed to him, food being served to him. How similar was this to the life he had once imagined? However, after the initial excitement, he gradually became depressed. He missed his parents, his friends, and his mobile phone that could connect to the internet at any time. Most importantly, he realized that this sudden comfortable life was not necessarily comfortable. First of all, she was the Viscount's child. In terms of marriage, this world was the same as Europe in the Middle Ages. It was strictly monogamous. Even the king was no exception. At most, he would have many lovers. However, his current identity was that of an illegitimate child. In other words, he was not the child of Viscount Fergus and his wife, but the child of Viscount Fergus and his lover. In this world where the concept of monogamy was strict, the status of an illegitimate child was not inferior to that of a servant, but the treatment was definitely not good. At least, it could not be compared to the children of Viscount Fergus and his wife. In fact, in the past 16 years, Viscount Fergus had rarely asked about his son. He had only brought him to the castle 2 months ago. Secondly, he was now facing a life-threatening crisis. The original owner of his body was assassinated. Although the assassin had already committed suicide by taking poison when he was caught, the mastermind behind the scenes was not found. In other words, there was a mastermind secretly eyeing his life. In the face of this life-threatening crisis, even if he lived a life of beautiful maids waiting on him, he would absolutely not be in the mood to enjoy it. Of course, the thick-skinned people were an exception, but he was obviously not one of them. There was also the danger of being exposed. In this world, there was a mysterious power called blood force. The original owner of his body had practiced it before and was slightly talented. He started practicing it at the age of 15, and in just 1 year, he cultivated blood force and became a lower-level blood warrior. Even his Viscount father, who had always ignored him, saw him in a new light and brought him to the castle. However, he did not know whether it was because the original owner of his body had been killed or because he had somehow transmigrated, but this blood force had disappeared. Yes, it had disappeared. In other words, he was now a fake, lower-level blood warrior. He could imagine how Viscount Fergus's attitude toward him would change if he knew that his blood force had disappeared. He might even be driven out of the castle immediately, and his treatment might not even be as good as when he came to the castle. Therefore, although his current life seemed beautiful with maids waiting on him, and he did not have to worry about food and drink, in reality, it was dangerous on all sides. He could be driven out of the castle at any time, or even lose his life. Pushing open the bedroom door, Gray walked in. The spacious room was more than 20 square meters. What entered his eyes was a row of long cabinets. They were divided into a formal wardrobe, an ordinary wardrobe, and a shoe cabinet. Among them, in the formal wardrobe, there were 2 sets of formal clothes with beautiful feathers on the shoulders. In the ordinary wardrobe, there were 5 sets of daily clothes that were slightly plain but could still be seen to be of high quality. In the shoe cabinet, there were 3 pairs of brand new leather boots. These were all purchased after he came to the castle. Before he came to the castle, although he would not starve, he would not have been able to wear such good clothes and boots. In fact, the beautiful personal maid following him now was also assigned to him when he came to the castle 2 months ago. Against the wall in the room was a bed with a white velvet feather quilt. It would not be crowded even if 2 or 3 people slept on it. Against the window, there was a desk and a chair. On the desk, there was an oil lamp with a glass cover at the top. It was emitting a soft light. Gray could see everything in the room because of this oil lamp. The oil burning in the oil lamp seemed to have some kind of spice added to it, and the room was filled with a faint smell of incense. "Brother, where have you been?" Seeing Gray push open the door and enter, a girl of about 14 years old wearing a white gauze dress jumped down from the chair beside the desk. She ran towards Gray in 3 steps and tightly hugged one of Gray's arms. The girl's facial features were delicate, and her skin was white with a tinge of rosy. Like Gray, she had black hair and blue eyes. Because Gray had already appeared, her face revealed a light sigh of relief. The girl's name was Sarah Fergus. She was Gray's sister from the same father and mother. She inherited her black hair from their mother, who died of depression, and her blue eyes from Viscount Fergus. Just like the original owner of this body, she had also been brought into the castle by Viscount Fergus 2 months ago. Clearly, the reason why the Viscount was brought into the castle was most likely because of his brother, who shared the same father and mother, being valued. After a slight hesitation, Gray stretched out his empty hand and touched the girl's head. "Go to the balcony and get some fresh air." Gray was a little uncomfortable being so close to an unfamiliar girl. He was no longer the girl's brother. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I just didn't see you and was a little worried. I was afraid that you would encounter another assassin." The girl Sarah shook her head and said, "Don't worry, this is the castle. Assassins can't sneak in." Gray smiled and comforted her. But hearing Gray's comforting words, the worry on Sarah's face did not fade. "Okay, don't worry, nothing will happen." Gray directly interrupted her because some words could not be said, especially in this castle. At this moment, his chest was still wrapped in gauze, and it was faintly painful. It was left by the assassin. The attack was vicious. If not for the timely protection of the Viscount's guards, he would not have had the chance to take over this body. After all, if the heart was pierced, even if he took over the body, he would still die. As for the mastermind behind the assassin, he and Sarah both had their own guesses. In the past 15 years, the original owner of the body had lived outside the castle without any guards, but he had never encountered an assassination attempt. This time, he had just moved into the castle and immediately encountered an assassination attempt. Obviously, the assassination attempt had something to do with the original owner of the body moving into the castle. When the body's original owner moved into the castle, the ones who were the most unhappy were naturally the Viscount's wife and his 2 brothers and 1 sister born from the Viscount's wife. According to his estimation, the mastermind behind the scenes was very likely one of these 4 people, or perhaps all 4 of them were involved. In other words, it was very likely that he was living with someone who wanted to kill him, and was being watched by the other party with killing intent. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel a trace of haze in his heart. He could not think of a way to return to his original world. Even if there was, it was not something that the original owner of this body could come into contact with. After all, the original owner of this body was only the illegitimate son of a viscount. Since he could not find a way to return, the only thing he could do was to survive in this world. And the mastermind behind the assassin obviously did not want him to live. He did not know if he would have the chance to take over the body if he died again, but he definitely did not want to take the risk. I have to heal my wounds as soon as possible and start cultivating. I have to confirm whether the force of blood has really disappeared or if it is temporarily hidden due to my injuries. Gray decided in his heart. In the face of such a hidden danger, relying on the protection of the castle guards obviously could not guarantee absolute safety. The only thing he could do now was to increase his strength as soon as possible so that he could have the power to protect himself. Moreover, if the worst-case scenario was that his force of blood had indeed disappeared, he had to find a way to cultivate it again before Viscount Fergus noticed. Viscount Fergus's regard was his only protective umbrella. If he lost it, his situation would be even more dangerous. Chapter 2. A few days later, in the morning. After eating a breakfast of lamb chops, fruit salad, honey bread, and sugar milk, Gray, who was wearing a light gray battle suit, walked towards the castle's outdoor training field, followed by his personal maid. The breakfast made by the castle chef was to Gray's liking. Although it was a pity that he couldn't eat the dishes from his previous life, it was definitely not hard to swallow. It was understandable that the nobles, as a group of people who knew how to enjoy themselves, would not let their tongues be wronged. The chefs they hired must be excellent cooks. Greetings, young Master Gray. Walking along the corridor leading to the outdoor training grounds, from time to time, there would be maids and male servants bowing respectfully to Gray. Their attitudes were all extremely respectful. Even though he was an illegitimate child, he was still the illegitimate child that Viscount Fergus had valued. These servants obviously wouldn't be so stupid as to give Gray a hard time. Gray nodded slightly as a greeting, as usual, and walked all the way to the outdoor training field. The training field was paved with white stones, about half the size of a football field. There were clusters of colorful flower beds around it, and there was a pavilion with a stone table next to it. If one was tired from training, one could rest here. There was already a person in the training field. This was a young man in his early 20s. He wore a white leather battle suit, had a handsome face, and a head of golden hair, shining under the sun. Seeing Gray, the young man's expression flashed. He stopped training and walked over. He took the towel from a maid and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He said to Gray, "Gray, why don't you rest for a few more days before starting training?" As he spoke, the young man smiled slightly. His attitude was very amiable, but Gray couldn't help but feel a trace of vigilance in his heart. The young man was none other than the elder brother of this body, the eldest son of Viscount Fergus and his wife, Bernal Fergus. If it was the original owner of this body, he might have been deceived by the young man's amiable scene just now. However, as a person who had been in the society for several years in his previous life, he noticed the gloominess of the young man when he saw him. Although he quickly covered it up, he still noticed it. "Thank you for your concern, Brother Bernal. I'm almost recovered." Gray imitated the tone of the original owner of this body and said, "Is that so? Then you go ahead and train." The blond young man Bernal nodded and walked to the pavilion. After watching him leave, Gray walked into the training field and recalled the training method. In this world, there was only one type of cultivation system, and that was the Blood Warrior. This was a cultivation system that humans learned from the blood fiends in the process of fighting against them. So the related cultivation method was called the Blood Method. Gray and his Fergus family's training method was called Wolf of the Wind. This was a training method derived from a blood fiend called the Wind Wolf. It was divided into 4 training postures: crawling, pouncing, biting, and facing the sky. Crawling, imitating the movements of a wolf patiently waiting for its prey. Pouncing, imitating the movements of a wolf pouncing on its prey. Biting, imitating the movements of a wolf opening its sharp teeth to bite its prey. Facing the sky, imitating the movements of a wolf howling at the sky. After going through the 4 postures in his mind, although he was no longer the same person, his memory of training was still there. Gray began to practice from the first posture, crawling. He half squatted with his legs apart and his body bent forward. He stretched out his hands with his palms facing down, like a wolf waiting for its prey. At the same time, he visualized a green-winged wolf crawling in the grass with its green eyes staring at its prey in the distance. He maintained this posture for a full 10 minutes. Suddenly, he stomped his feet and pounced forward. His 5 fingers opened into claws, like a wolf pouncing on its prey instead of waiting. The winged wolf he visualized in his mind also turned into a pouncing attack. He maintained this posture for another 10 minutes. Then his pouncing claws changed. He put his hands together and his wrists touched. He quickly stretched out his hands and closed them like a wolf's mouth. The movement of the winged wolf in his mind became a biting attack. 10 minutes later, he slowly half squatted with his hands hanging down. He raised his head and opened his mouth as much as he could, like a wolf howling at the sky. The movement of the wolf in his mind also became a howling winged wolf in the moonlight. Gray was sweating profusely by the time he finished practicing the whole set of postures. He didn't know if it was because of the memories of the body's original owner, or because the body had formed memories, but when Gray performed this set of training postures, although not perfect, it could still be considered standard and didn't show any abnormalities. Originally, he wanted to find another place to train. However, he usually trained in the training field. If he suddenly changed places, it might make him suspicious. Therefore, he dismissed this idea and continued to train in the training field like the body's original owner. He stopped training. His expression didn't change, but his heart couldn't help but sink. Sure enough, it's the worst result. The blood force cultivated by the body's original owner has really disappeared. He originally hoped that through training, he could once again stimulate the blood force hidden in his body. Now, it seemed that the blood force had really disappeared from his body. Although he didn't know the reason why it disappeared was because the body's original owner was attacked and died, or because he transmigrated, but in general, the disappearance of the blood force was a fact. Losing the blood force was a very bad result for him. The reason why Viscount Fergus valued him as an illegitimate child was because of his talent for training. If Viscount Fergus knew that his blood force had disappeared, even if he didn't immediately chase him out of the castle, at least he wouldn't value him as much as before. Losing the favor of Viscount Fergus and facing the assassination of the mastermind behind the scenes, his ending could be imagined. After losing the blood force, my physical fitness has deteriorated to before I started training. I've almost reached my limit after just 1 round of training. Gray thought to himself as he wiped away the sweat that slid down his forehead. Under normal circumstances, a low-level blood warrior would be able to train 2 rounds of the blood technique in a row. However, just now, he almost couldn't even withstand 1 round. The only good news is that the blood wolf blood in my body hasn't disappeared. The training of the blood technique wasn't just about possessing the blood technique. In fact, other than the blood technique, one also needed to possess the corresponding blood beast blood. Only by possessing both the blood technique and the corresponding blood beast blood at the same time could one become a blood warrior. Naturally, it was impossible for humans to possess the blood beast blood. Therefore, generally speaking, clans that possessed the blood technique would implant the blood of the corresponding blood beast in their children before they started training. The specific method seemed to be to use the most precious blood essence in the blood of the blood beast and mix it with some medicine before giving it to their children to consume. Chapter 3. In fact, the original owner of this body was already overwhelmed by the favor at that time. As an illegitimate child who was not valued, he had originally thought that he would not have the opportunity to cultivate blood techniques. After all, such a situation was very common in noble families. My body is clearly restless. This restlessness will only appear when I have the corresponding bloodline. Clearly, the Wind Wolf bloodline has not disappeared. When a person with a bloodline cultivated the corresponding bloodline, their body would show obvious agitation. Every inch of the body's muscle tissue would be extremely active as if lead and mercury were washing through the body. However, a person without the corresponding bloodline would not have such a feeling. He could clearly feel this feeling just now, which meant that the wind wolf bloodline implanted in his body had not disappeared. This was obviously good news for him. After all, if the wind wolf bloodline disappeared, with his current status, he would not be able to bypass Viscount Fergus and implant the wind wolf bloodline again. Looks like your body has not fully recovered. At this time, Bernal, who had rested and was preparing to cultivate again, walked up and said to Gray. He naturally noticed Gray's sweaty appearance, but he thought that it was because Gray's body had not fully recovered and his strength had not yet recovered. Yes, Brother Bernal, I'll take my leave first. Gray's face revealed a trace of helplessness from not being able to continue cultivating. Go, take care of yourself. Bernal's face had a smile like a spring breeze, like a good brother who cared for his younger brother. However, no one knew what he was thinking in his heart. Receiving the towel handed over by his personal maid, Gray wiped himself and then walked along the corridor back to his residence in the castle. The personal maid's name was Barbara. She did not have a surname. To a commoner, a surname was a luxury in this world, and only nobles and their descendants could have one. Therefore, when a person's name had a surname, even if they were not nobles, they would have some kind of relationship with nobles. Pa. Gray walked along the corridor and came face to face with a young man and a maid following behind him. He was walking towards Gray. The young man had dazzling blonde hair and was slightly older than Gray. He should be around 17 or 18 years old. He had a high-nosed bridge and a handsome face, but there was a hint of arrogance on his face. Stopping in his tracks, Gray tried his best to imitate the tone of the original owner of this body, Brother Lys. The young man was the second son of the Viscount, which was also the second brother of this body. Faced with Gray's greeting, the young man snorted coldly and walked past Gray. Instead, it was the male and female servants following behind him who bowed to Gray. Receiving such a cold response, Gray did not mind. He did not have the slightest intention of pleasing the young man in front of him. The reason why he did this was only to maintain superficial etiquette so that he would not be picked on. In fact, compared to Bernal, the eldest brother of this body, he was more willing to deal with this second brother in front of him, who always showed his emotions on his face. This was because people like this were simpler. It was easy to distinguish friend from foe and would not act one way in front of others. It was easier to deal with people like this. For the next few days, Gray persisted in practicing the blood technique Wolf of Wind twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. After a few days of practice, he gradually had an idea of the condition of this body. Although this body had lost the power of blood, its innate talent should not have been abolished or damaged. After a few days of practice, he could clearly feel that his physical fitness had increased slightly. Compared to the first time the original owner of this body had practiced, the progress of his practice was almost the same. However, the original owner of this body had practiced for a full year before he was able to practice the power of blood. If he wanted to practice the power of blood, he would obviously need to practice for at least a year. To be honest, he had no confidence that he would not be exposed in this 1 year. Originally, with the physical fitness of a lower blood warrior, practicing the Wolf of Wind twice in a row was not a problem at all. However, he had been using the excuse that his body had not fully recovered as an excuse to practice only once. If he took too long, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. Although he could find a remote place to practice, the entire castle was filled with Viscount Fergus's spies. It could be said that it was extremely difficult to not be noticed. Young Master Gray, this is your share for this month. At this moment, the maid Barbara walked in with a tray in her hands. On the tray was a bronze container the size of a wine cup. Inside the container was more than half a cup of red liquid. Just put it here. Gray pointed to the tea table beside him and said. The maid Barbara placed the tray on the tea table. Gray waved his hand, indicating for her to leave. His gaze, on the other hand, was looking at the liquid in the bronze container. The thick smell of blood had already entered his nose. The liquid in the bronze container was indeed blood. However, it was not ordinary blood, but the blood of the blood beast, the wind wolf. The blood of blood beasts generally had two uses. One was to extract the essence of the blood to implant into the bloodline. The other was to be consumed during daily practice. As a blood warrior who practiced blood techniques, consuming the blood of the corresponding blood beast was extremely beneficial to their practice. Therefore, any family that could afford it would hunt or purchase the blood of the corresponding blood beast for their descendants to consume. However, although this type of blood was not as precious as blood essence, it was still extremely valuable. Therefore, even in the Fergus family, every descendant only had one chance to consume it every month. Gray extended his hand and picked up the bronze container. Although he was extremely resistant to drinking blood, his current situation was not the time to be hesitant. If he could slightly increase the speed of his practice, he would definitely not miss this opportunity. Goo-goo, forcefully enduring the smell of blood, Gray swallowed it down in one gulp, just like when he drank syrup when he was young. His mouth was filled with the taste of blood. A wave of disgust arose in Gray's heart. He resisted the urge to vomit. Suddenly, his expression changed. How can there be such a strong effect? At this moment, a burning sensation appeared in his stomach. Then, his face and neck turned red. His entire body was like a cooked lobster. His face was bright red, showing an abnormal shade of crimson. With his stomach as the center, a terrifying heat radiated outwards. He felt as if his entire body was being roasted in flames. Drops of sweat slid down his forehead. What is going on? The blood of the blood beast was a high-grade item. Before the original owner of this body came to the castle, he naturally did not have the opportunity to consume it. However, in the 2 months since the original owner of this body came to the castle, he had consumed it twice. He had consumed the blood twice, and each time, his blood force had increased slightly. It was obvious that the effect of this blood beast's blood was very significant. Chapter 4. A long while later, perhaps 10 minutes, or perhaps half an hour. The intense heat had already blurred Gray's perception of time. The boiling heat rising from his stomach slowly disappeared, and Gray's body temperature also slowly returned to normal. At this moment, his entire body was soaked in sweat, and his hair was stuck together. His clothes were drenched, as if he had just been fished out of the water. At the same time, he felt extremely fatigued, as if he had gone through an intense battle. Every muscle in his body was filled with fatigue. In contrast, he felt that his strength had increased by quite a bit. The most obvious feeling was that when he clenched his fists, they were no longer as weak as before, but filled with strength. Also, he felt extremely hungry, so hungry that he could eat an entire pig. Picking up a brass bell with a handle from the side table, Gray shook it a few times. Barbara, dressed in a black and white maid uniform, pushed open the door and walked into the bedroom. As Gray's personal maid, other than taking care of Gray, she was not in charge of the castle's daily affairs. Thus, she had been guarding outside the bedroom. When she heard Gray ringing the bell, she immediately pushed open the door and walked in. "Young Master Gray, what are your orders? What happened to you?" I'll get someone to invite the pharmacist over." Seeing Gray sweating profusely, Barbara was shocked. She immediately wanted to run to find someone to inform the pharmacist. As a maid who took care of Gray's daily life, if anything happened to Gray, she would definitely be severely punished. She might even be beaten to death. In the territory of the nobles had the power to kill the commoners. "No need, I'm fine. It's just that I'm a little sweaty after consuming the blood of the blood fiends. Just get someone to prepare a bath for me." Gray hurriedly stopped her. Although he was unsure of the reason for this change, it was obviously best not to let too many people know, especially Viscount Fergus and the rest. "You really don't need it?" After being stopped by Gray, Barbara's face was still filled with worry. It's probably because my body hasn't fully recovered and I'm sweating a lot after consuming the blood of the blood fiends. Just get someone to prepare a bath for me." Gray stood up and stretched his body, indicating that he was fine. Thinking of his inexplicable hunger, he added, "Also, get the kitchen to prepare another set of breakfast for me. I'm still a little hungry." "Yes, I'll go now." Seeing that Gray was indeed fine and had a good appetite, Babla heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly left. Not long after, she returned with a tray in her hands. On the tray, there were 3 pieces of honey bread, a large piece of ham, and a cup of milky white milk. Young Master Gray, the bathroom is already preparing the bath water. You should be able to go over after you finish your meal. Babla said to Gray as she set up a folding table in the room and placed the food on it. During the period when Gray was injured, he had been eating in his bedroom, so there was always a folding table in his bedroom. Got it. Sitting at the table, Gray picked up his knife and fork and eagerly started eating. His stomach was empty, as though he had been starving for several days. It was really uncomfortable. It had been less than 2 hours since he finished his breakfast, but now he was hungry again. Without a doubt, this was one of the side effects of the mutation just now. Barely maintaining his elegance, Gray gulped down a large piece of ham, 3 pieces of honey bread, and a cup of milk. He felt that he was only half full. To avoid appearing too abnormal, he did not ask Babla to go to the kitchen to get more food. Instead, he went to the bathroom. After taking a hot bath, he changed into dry clothes and put on his combat armor. Gray went straight to the training ground. He was eager to know how much his body had improved after the mutation. As it was almost noon, there was no one else in the training ground. Gray immediately started practicing the blood technique, Wolf of Wind. Half squatting with his legs apart, body bent forward, hands extended, palms facing down, like a wolf waiting for its prey, crawling, pouncing, biting, facing the sky. After more than half an hour, he had practiced the 4 postures of Wolf of Wind, one by one. After that, he did not stop practicing like he did a few days ago. Instead, he started a new round of practice. In the end, he only stopped after he had finished practicing the first posture, panting heavily. Taking the towel handed to him by the maid Babla, Gray wiped his sweat and sat on the stone bench in the pavilion. There was a trace of joy in his eyes that could hardly be concealed. Without a doubt, his body had improved greatly. With the physical strength of a lower-level blood warrior who practiced the power of blood, he could probably practice twice in a row. Due to the disappearance of his blood force, his physical fitness had deteriorated. In the past few days of cultivation, he could only barely endure 1 set each time. Now, however, he could already endure 1 set in 1 position. Clearly, his physical fitness had undergone a great improvement. This Blood Beast blood is really good stuff. It can actually improve so much just by taking it once. Based on this improvement, the time it takes for me to become a lower-level blood warrior should be greatly shortened. Let's not talk about whether there will be such a big improvement the next time I take the Blood Beast blood. The effect of this Blood Beast blood is really too remarkable. Thinking of this, Gray could not help but raise his eyebrows. The original owner of this body had already taken the blood of the Wind Wolf twice. Although there was a certain degree of improvement in each of the 2 times, the effect was definitely not as remarkable as it was now. The improvement in one go was so great that it could not even be described as remarkable. Could it be because this body is no longer a lower-level blood warrior? No, that can't be right. If it was because of this reason, the 2 brothers and sister of this body, in name, would not have taken a full 2 years to become lower-level blood warriors. Gray thought of the fact that he was no longer a lower-level blood warrior and that his body was weaker. However, he immediately dismissed this thought. Before the original owner of this body became a lower-level blood warrior, he indeed did not have any Blood Beast blood resources. However, the 2 brothers and sister born to Viscount Fergus's official wife did. Even so, the 3 of them still spent a full 2 years to raise their strength to lower-level blood warrior. It was also because of this that the original owner of this body, who had raised to lower-level blood warrior in a year, was valued by Viscount Fergus and received into the Viscount Castle. Could it be because of this body's aptitude? No, that can't be right. No matter how good the aptitude is, it is impossible to improve so much just by taking the Blood Beast blood once. The sudden disappearance of the power of blood, and then such a huge improvement just by taking the Blood Beast blood once. These 2 things can be said to be extremely strange. Could these 2 things be related in some way? Gray could not help but connect this to the sudden disappearance of the power of blood. According to his estimation, the biggest possibility was that some strange, unknown change had occurred when he had occupied this body, and it was this change that had prompted this current phenomenon. From what happened to my body, this change is very likely to increase my absorption efficiency of the beneficial components in the blood wolf's blood. No, perhaps it is not just an increase in absorption efficiency. I'm afraid there are other changes. Otherwise, I would not be hungry again so soon after eating breakfast. Thinking of his suddenly extremely hungry stomach, Gray felt that the change in his body should not be just an increase in absorption efficiency. Otherwise, his stomach would not have become so hungry. The body becoming hungry is due to insufficient energy supply. The reason for insufficient energy supply is that the body's tissues and cells have consumed a large amount of nutrients in a short period of time. Most of these consumed nutrients should have been used to improve my body's fitness. Speaking of which, I just exercised a bit, and now I feel hungry again. How could I be hungry so quickly? Could it be that my power of blood has not disappeared and only needs a large amount of nutrients to recover? No, this conclusion is a bit forced. Gray once again denied this conjecture of his. Before consuming the blood wolf's blood, my appetite was just average. I did not urgently need a large amount of food. Obviously, this craving for a large amount of food only appeared after consuming the blood wolf's blood. Speaking of which, the blood wolf's blood has not been processed in any way. It is considered to be a living organism. Could it be that by consuming the blood wolf's blood, I have obtained some kind of biological change? Based on his knowledge from his previous life, even if he ate raw blood, he would at most be infected with parasites. It would not cause any kind of biological change. But in this world, it was not the same world as in his previous life. At least, the existence of the blood warriors who had strange powers was not something that existed in his previous life. In addition, there was the precedent of using the blood essence to implant blood vessels. It was not impossible for some kind of biological change to occur. What kind of biological change is this? It feels like the current me is in a rapid transformation. My body needs a large amount of nutrients. Gray's furrowed eyebrows relaxed. If he wanted to understand the changes in his body, he was afraid that he would have to observe for the next few days to come to a complete conclusion. Chapter 5. Half a month later, in the evening, in the dining hall of Viscount Fergus Castle, on the ceiling, a huge lotus-shaped crystal lamp shone brightly. Just one lamp was enough to illuminate the spacious dining hall, as if it were daytime. The crystal lamp wasn't the oil lamp in Gray's room, but a rune lamp made by a rune master. Upon closer inspection, one could see that the center of the huge lotus-shaped crystal was surrounded by a circle of strange runes. Some of these runes looked like beasts lying on their backs. Some looked like the movements of a sacrificial ritual. Some looked like snakes standing up, and most of them were strange lines that couldn't be seen. These rune lamps were extremely expensive to make. Even with the resources of the Viscount's family, they couldn't set up one in every room. They could only set it up in some important rooms, such as the banquet hall, the dining hall, the conference room. Under the illumination of the light, 7 people sat around a long dining table. At the head of the table was a blond, middle-aged man. He wore a long coat with 2 rows of buttons in front of his chest and a collar around his neck. He had a golden beard, a pair of blue eyes, and a dignified aura about him. He was the owner of the Viscount's castle, Viscount Emerson Fergus. Sitting opposite him was a brown-haired woman. The woman wore a low-cut black gauze dress, and a huge sapphire necklace hung around her neck. Her entire person looked graceful and luxurious. Although her face was already slightly aged, one could still see the beauty of her youth. It was just that her lips were slightly thin, giving people the impression that she was a mean person. This person was Viscount Fergus's wife, Milan Harris, a woman from the Baron's family. On the right side of Viscount Fergus sat 2 men and a woman. They were the eldest brother of this body, Bernal Fergus, the second brother, Elise Fergus, and the third sister, Caroline Fergus. The first 2 had inherited Viscount Fergus' blonde hair and blue eyes. The latter's eyes were inherited from Viscount Fergus, but her hair color was inherited from the Viscount's wife. She was about a year older than Gray. She was tall and had a high-nose bridge. She had the excellent genes of Viscount Fergus and his wife. On the left side of Fergus sat Gray and his sister, Sarah Fergus. Both of them had black hair, which they inherited from their mother, who died of depression. Their eyes were blue, which they inherited from Viscount Fergus. Ding ding. The sound of the table knife clashing with the white porcelain plate was heard. In the dining hall, Viscount Fergus and the rest had finished their meal. Only Gray was still eating. This was already his second dinner. This was the first time Gray came to the dining hall for a meal since he was injured. Seeing Gray eating his second dinner, some of them were calm, such as Viscount Fergus and his wife, and Gray's eldest brother, Bernal. They had heard from the servants that Gray's appetite had increased tremendously in the past few days. He had to eat 2 servings for every meal. Some of them stared at Gray in surprise, such as the third sister of this body, Caroline. She was more indifferent to the 2 illegitimate children that her father brought back because they had almost no influence on her. Ding! Placing the table knife and silver fork on the porcelain plate, Gray took the tablecloth from the maid beside him and wiped his lips and hands. He appeared to be a little uneasy as he spoke. "I'm sorry, Father, Madam. My appetite has suddenly increased recently." He had originally planned to only eat 1 serving and was going to ask Babla to get another serving when he returned to the bedroom. However, thinking of the sudden increase in his appetite, he was afraid that Viscount Fergus already knew about it, so he didn't hide it anymore. "It's fine," Viscount Fergus said faintly. "You're still growing. You should eat more." Viscount Fergus's wife, Milan, said with a faint smile on her face. The smile on her face was perfect and impeccable. It carried a sense of familiarity and didn't seem distant at all. However, Gray knew that it was all a disguise. She was probably the most unhappy when the original owner of this body and his sister were brought to this castle. After all, they were the children of Viscount Fergus's lover. Which wife would be happy to live with the children of her husband's lover? Moreover, if that assassination really came from one of the 4 people, it was likely that this Viscount's wife was the middleman. After all, if she wanted to mobilize people without alerting Viscount Fergus, she could only use her family. "How are your injuries recovering?" Viscount Fergus asked again. "Thank you for your concern, Father. It's almost healed," Gray said with a slightly excited expression. After saying this, even he felt a burst of goosebumps. The one in charge of this body was no longer the original Gray. There was no father and son relationship between him and Viscount Fergus. However, in order to not show any abnormalities, he could only act like this. The current him was facing the threat of the mastermind behind the scenes. He simply couldn't leave Viscount Fergus's protection. If he lost Viscount Fergus's protection, the assassin would probably immediately come. Therefore, he couldn't lose Viscount Fergus's protection. Moreover, he didn't think that Viscount Fergus was really very good to the original owner of this body. At least, it wasn't always like this. In his opinion, Viscount Fergus was a person who cared more about benefits than family. In the previous 16 years, Viscount Fergus almost didn't care about the Gray siblings. The number of times he went to see them could be counted on one hand. It was because of this that the 2's mother died of depression. When Gray displayed his outstanding talent as a blood warrior, it was as if he had suddenly discovered his conscience and brought the 2 of them into the castle. Obviously, all of this was because of the talent that Gray had displayed. In the end, it was still because Gray's current talent was worthy of his attention. "That's good." Viscount Fergus seemed to be very satisfied with Gray's performance. He said with a faint smile on his face, "You can ask your elder brother Bernal for advice on cultivation. He is now a middle blood warrior." "I will, Father." Gray first respectfully responded and then looked at his nominal elder brother Bernal. "When the time comes, I might have to disturb big brother Bernal. You're welcome at any time," Bernal said with a sunny smile on his face. Beside him, Gray's second brother Elise restrained his usual contemptuous expression when he saw Gray because of Viscount Fergus's presence. He coldly watched the 2's interaction. He did not know much about Gray, but he knew his elder brother well. His hatred and disgust for Gray far exceeded his own. The conversation after dinner only lasted for a while before it ended. After greeting Sarah, Gray returned to his bedroom and lay on the soft bed. His mind was in a whirl. My body is indeed in the midst of some kind of transformation. It had been half a month since he last consumed the blood of a blood fiend. In this half a month, his appetite had greatly increased. Every meal was twice that of a normal person, and this was only barely enough to fill his stomach. If not for the fact that he was afraid of being too abnormal, he had even planned to eat 3 portions at a time. But after careful consideration, he gave up on this idea. A meal for 2 could barely be covered up by his increased appetite, but if it was 3 portions at a time, that would be too abnormal. And after eating such a large amount of food, the changes in his body were obvious. His physical fitness was growing at an observable rate every day. After half a month, he could already complete the second posture for the second time. And this rapid growth is obviously not due to practicing blood techniques. In order to determine if this growth was related to the cultivation of the blood technique, he did not practice the blood technique for the entire day yesterday. However, on the second day, he still felt that his body's quality had increased. Moreover, it was not much different from the day before. Obviously, the increase in his physical fitness did not come from practicing blood techniques. At least, most of the effects did not come from practicing blood techniques, but from some unknown transformation. What kind of transformation is this? At the end of the transformation, to what extent will my strength increase? Gray was almost certain that the reason for this transformation was the blood fiend's blood that he consumed a few days ago. But as for what kind of transformation was taking place in his body and how much his strength would increase at the end of the transformation, he had no idea. He searched through the memories of the original owner of his body, but there were no memories that had the slightest resemblance to this transformation. Now it seems that the blood power of the original owner of this body did not completely disappear, but was only hidden. This conjecture cannot be completely rejected. I'm afraid that only by raising my blood power back to low-level blood warrior and seeing if my physical fitness will increase rapidly can I determine the validity of this conjecture. Also, the original owner of this body was only an illegitimate child. The level of contact he had was too low, and the amount of information he knew was too little. It seems that I need to go to the castle's library tomorrow to look up books related to blood techniques. No matter how he thought about it, he could not come up with a reason. Gray skipped over matters related to the transformation of his body and thought about the benefits this transformation brought. This transformation allows my physical fitness to increase rapidly. For me, this is absolutely good news. At his current rate of improvement, he was afraid that it would only take a little more than a month for his strength to return to low-level blood warrior. At that time, the risk of him being exposed would be greatly reduced. In the entire castle, Viscount Fergus and the others did not know much about him. They only knew that he had already practiced blood power and had reached the realm of low-level blood warrior. After all, they had only known each other for a little more than 2 months. And as long as he regained the strength of a low-level blood warrior, the possibility of him being exposed could be said to be extremely small. Chapter 6. The next day, Gray found a secluded place and dismissed the maid Barbara. He then began to practice the blood technique, Wolf of Wind. It had been more than half a month since the assassination attempt, and the injuries on his body had long since healed. He could no longer use his injuries as an excuse that he could only practice the technique once. Thus, he did not go to the training field, but instead found a secluded place to practice. Although this would raise suspicions, and after a while, people would definitely notice. After all, there was no such thing as a secluded place in the castle. However, he could not care less about that now. Fortunately, as long as he could endure this month, he would be able to recover the strength of the original owner of this body, a low-level blood warrior. At that time, even if someone noticed something unusual, it would no longer matter. In a secluded place, Gray half squatted with his legs apart and his body bent down. His hands hung down, palms facing down, and he began to practice the first posture of the blood technique, Wolf of Wind, crawling. The 4 movements of Wolf of Wind were crawling, pouncing, biting, and facing the sky. They were all deduced from the Wind Wolf's combat habits by observing the Wind Wolf's life. These 4 movements condensed the essence of the Wind Wolf's life habits. During this period of time, every time he practiced, Gray could not help but recall the Shingy Fist from his previous life. In his previous life, Gray was only an ordinary office worker. He had never come into contact with martial arts, so naturally, he did not know Shingy Fist. However, there was no harm in learning what kind of fist technique Shingy Fist was from the internet. According to the introduction on the internet, Shingy Fist was a fist technique formed by simulating the life forms and fighting of 12 different animals. It had the effect of improving one's physical fitness. How similar was this to the Wolf of Wind he was currently practicing? The movements were also deduced from the life forms and fighting of animals, and they also had the effect of improving one's physical fitness. Of course, there were differences. To a certain extent, the blood technique was of a higher level than Shingy Fist. Based on Gray's experience in his previous life, the highest achievement in Shingy Fist, apart from the effect of prolonging one's life, was that one could at most fight better than an ordinary person. However, the blood technique was different. Not to mention the terrifying experts that he had only heard of who could destroy a city by themselves. Just the Shingy Fist that the original owner of this body had seen had already surpassed the Shingy Fist of his previous life. The highest achievement of the original owner of this body was the cultivation of blood energy, reaching the level of a lower-level blood warrior. At that time, under the orders of Viscount Fergus, he had single-handedly challenged 5 adult soldiers who had not cultivated blood energy in one. And this was only considered ordinary. The original owner of this body had once seen Viscount Fergus, who had reached the level of a ferocious warrior, display his strength. He had actually spat out a huge green wind blade from his mouth, directly cutting a tree that required one person to wrap their arms around it into 2. Every time he recalled the memories of the original owner of this body, Gray couldn't help but be shocked. Through cultivation, a person could actually reach the level of spitting wind blades. This really subverted the knowledge of his previous life. If a tree that required one person to wrap their arms around it could be cut into 2, how could a human's body of flesh and blood withstand it? If such a person had appeared in his previous life, perhaps he would have immediately swept away all the martial arts experts of his previous life. And according to Gray's knowledge, in this world, although there were not many existences with the strength of Viscount Fergus, there were definitely not few either. Above the lower-level blood warrior was the middle-level blood warrior. Above the middle-level blood warrior was the high-level blood warrior. Above the high-level blood warrior was the ferocious blood warrior. And above the ferocious blood warrior were the berserk blood warrior, the barbaric blood warrior, the desolate blood warrior, and the royal blood warrior. Obviously, the ferocious blood warrior was far from the peak of this world's cultivation realm. After completing one cycle of the blood technique Wolf of the Wind, Gray had only stopped after he had already practiced some of the second and third postures due to his lack of physical strength. Compared to yesterday, his physical fitness had once again increased by a large margin. After finishing his cultivation, Gray went to the study on the 2nd floor of the castle. The main building of Viscount Fergus Castle had a typical Gothic architectural style and was divided into 3 floors. On the 1st floor, there was a luxuriously decorated banquet hall, a hall for receiving guests, a dining room for dining, and a spacious sink bathroom. On the 2nd floor, there was a meeting room for important meetings, a library with many books, a study where the Viscount handled his daily affairs, and many other rooms with different uses. And on the 3rd floor, there were many bedrooms. Now, he was going to the library on the 2nd floor, where the books were stored. In this world, there was also a saying that knowledge was wealth. Therefore, the aristocracy paid great attention to the collection of books. Almost every aristocratic family would have a library. The only difference was the number of books in the library, and this often showed the depth of a family's resources. Pushing open the door to the library, what entered his eyes were 3 rows of black wooden bookshelves. On the bookshelves, there were many books with leather covers densely packed. Looking at the number, there should be more than 1,000 books. Although this amount of books wasn't much in Gray's previous world, in this world, it was a very large collection of books. Many Viscount families didn't have such a collection of books. Just from this point, one could see the depth of the Fergus family's resources. According to the memories of the original owner of this body, Gray knew that the Fergus family was a Viscount family with a history of more than 100 years. Among the surrounding Viscount families, the Fergus family's resources were relatively deep. After entering a library, Gray didn't go straight to the 3 bookshelves. Instead, he looked at the right side of the library and walked over. There was a white round table there. Around the round table, there were 6 black armchairs with hollowed-out patterns on the backs. At this moment, a maid wearing a black and white maid uniform was standing next to one of the armchairs, and a young girl wearing a yellow pleated skirt was sitting on the armchair. The young girl was holding a book in her hands and was reading it with great interest. When she felt someone push open the door and enter, she raised her head, revealing her beautiful blue eyes. This person was the 3rd sister of this body, Caroline. Big Sister Caroline. Gray walked over and greeted her politely. Although he didn't have a good impression of the Viscount's wife and their 3 children, since he lived in this castle, he had to show some basic courtesy. "Oh, you're here to look through the books?" Caroline asked indifferently. "Yes, Big Sister Caroline." "Then I'll go and look." Gray said, "Okay." The young girl nodded, paused for a moment, and then said, "The first shelf is the history of the continent. The second shelf is about blood magic. The third shelf is filled with miscellaneous books." "Thank you, Big Sister Caroline." Gray looked at the young girl with slight surprise, then turned and walked to the first shelf. Although it was a very ordinary reminder, Gray couldn't help but have a slightly better impression of the young girl. In the half a month that he had occupied this body, he didn't have much contact with the young girl. At most, he would greet her when they met in the corridor. The young girl gave him the biggest impression of indifference. She wasn't as warm as the eldest brother of this body, Bernal. She also wasn't like the second brother of this body, Elise, who showed contempt and hatred on her face. She was more indifferent to him, as if he was a stranger. Now it seemed that she was cold on the outside, but warm on the inside. Among the Viscount's wife and the 3 siblings, the one who was the friendliest to him was probably the one who was indifferent to him. Coming to the first shelf, Gray began to take out one book after another and flipped through it. Originally, he had planned to read up on books related to blood arts. However, considering that the original owner of this body had limited knowledge of this world, and that he was just a young man who had never traveled far, he decided to first learn about this world through history books. The Chronicles of the Purple Moon Kingdom was a book that recorded the major historical events of the Purple Moon Kingdom, which was the kingdom that Viscount Fergus was loyal to. Among them, there was a certain king's hard work, a certain count's and the Marquis family's decline, a certain major natural disaster, and a certain family that was destroyed by the kingdom due to rebellion from the text. It wasn't hard to see that the Richardson Wong family had been completely beautified. The kings of the past were either wise, philanthropic, or wise, while the rebellious families were all sinful and had committed many crimes that angered the heavens and the people. This clearly proved a sentence that Gray had said in his previous life. History was often written by the victors. The War of the 4 Kingdoms was about the major battles that happened between the 4 great kingdoms of the continent: the Flame Kingdom, the Purple Moon Kingdom, the Scarlet Kingdom, and the Jewel Kingdom, as well as the consequences of the battles. Compared to the Chronicles of the Purple Moon Kingdom, the War of the 4 Kingdoms was undoubtedly more objective, but this was only relative. For example, it recorded a major battle that happened a few decades ago that the original owner of this body had heard of. In that battle, the Alliance army of the Purple Moon Kingdom was defeated and was chased by the Blazing Sun Kingdom for hundreds of miles. However, in this book, it was said that the commander of the Purple Moon Kingdom had great foresight and strategically retreated hundreds of miles. The geography of the 4 kingdoms was about the geographical locations and topography of the Flame Kingdom, the Purple Moon Kingdom, the Scarlet Kingdom, and the Jewel Kingdom on the continent. The Flame Kingdom was located in the center of the continent, while the Purple Moon Kingdom, the Scarlet Kingdom, and the Jewel Kingdom were located on the 3 sides of the Flame Kingdom, bordering each other. The Blazing Sun Kingdom had high temperatures all year round, and its territory had many plains and lakes. The Purple Moon Kingdom had low temperatures all year round, and its territory had many hills and valleys. The Scarlet Kingdom and the Jewel Kingdom had low temperatures all year round, and the former had many valleys and valleys while the latter had many mountains and valleys. Gray's gaze swept across the books one after another. Many of the books only had a glance at their titles, and, after guessing what they were about, he no longer paid attention to them. He only wanted to understand this world and not to become a historian. Naturally, he didn't need to be too meticulous. The world is flat. Suddenly, he saw the title of a book with a black leather cover. He could not help but flip it open in surprise. Chapter 7. Flipping open the cover, the first thing that came into view was the title page. It was an introduction to the author of the book, Collins Felix. Collins Felix was a traveler who had no fixed abode all year round. He had been to the Flame Kingdom, the Jewel Kingdom, and the Scarlet Kingdom. He had even been to the ice fields outside the 4 kingdoms that were covered in snow all year round. Flipping to the back, it was his general conjecture about the world. In the eyes of the other, the world was an irregular, flat mass, and the sun was a luminous sphere revolving around this irregular, flat mass. When the sun appeared on the front side of the mass, it was day, and when the sun appeared on the back side of the mass, it was night. The end of the ice fields outside the 4 kingdoms was the end of the world. If someone could reach the end of the ice fields, they would be able to see the end of the world. Seeing this, Gray smiled in his heart and continued to read on without much concern. Although this world had extraordinary powers, in terms of understanding the world, it was ultimately inferior to his previous life. After all, the space technology of his previous life had allowed them to visit planets other than Earth in the solar system. In the process, they had completely confirmed that the Earth was spherical. The latter part was the evidence and observations that the other party had made in order to prove his theory that the Earth was flat. He had once organized a team of powerful blood warriors to head to the end of the ice fields to verify the conjecture that the end of the ice fields was the end of the world. However, they had been attacked by blood beasts many times along the way and suffered heavy casualties. In the end, they could only give up. Then, he had observed the ships on the largest lake in the Flame Kingdom, the Azure Lake. He had discovered that as the distance increased, the hulls and masts of the ships in his line of sight would gradually shrink. In the end, they became smaller and smaller, just like a model ship. In the end, the hulls and masts of the ships disappeared from his sight at the same time. Disappeared at the same time? This doesn't make sense. Seeing this, Gray's indifference disappeared. His eyes widened, and he almost blurted out. Fortunately, he held back and didn't disturb Caroline, who was also reading in the library. Collins Felix had made this observation in his previous life. However, the result of the other party's observation was that the hulls were the first to disappear and the masts were the last to disappear. Obviously, the result of the observation was completely different from Collins Felix's. Is there a problem with the observation, or is it really so? Gray was bewildered. If it was just a problem with Collins Felix's observation, or if it was deliberately falsified to prove that the Earth was flat, then the Earth was round in his previous life and could still be applied in this world. If there was no problem with the other party's observation results, and if there was no deliberate falsification, then whether the theory of Earth's circle in his previous life could be used in this world was up for debate. Continuing to flip through the book, Gray became serious this time. But after flipping through the entire book, Gray did not find any evidence that could prove Dipping's theory better than the previous observation. Gray raised his eyebrows slightly and then quickly relaxed. He put the book back on the bookshelf. Whether the world was round or flat didn't mean much to him now. The most important thing for him now was to strengthen his ability to protect himself. He seriously lacked a sense of security now. In order to increase his ability to protect himself, it was necessary to figure out what kind of transformation his body was undergoing. In addition to the book he had just flipped through, he already had a rough understanding of the continent's history. Thinking of this, he walked to the second row of bookshelves and began to flip through books related to blood arts. Summary of Common Blood Beasts was a book that introduced common blood beasts. The book listed more than 100 types of blood beasts that were more commonly seen. Each type was accompanied by a picture and a description, allowing the reader to have a clearer understanding of the blood beast's appearances and abilities. There was a description of the wind wolf. It was a type of blood beast that had green fur all over its body. Its appearance was similar to that of an ordinary wolf, and its adult body was strong enough to spit out wind blades. When it was young, it already had the strength of a low-level blood warrior. When it reached adulthood, its strength was comparable to that of a ferocious blood warrior. The nominal father of this body, Viscount Fergus, was able to spit out wind blades. Presumably, this was the result of practicing the blood art, wind wolf, to the extreme. Origin of Species was a book that described the origin of the blood beasts. According to the book, if one traced the origin of any blood beast bloodline, it could be traced back to a certain high-grade blood beast. Some could even be traced back to legendary sacred beasts or even mythical beasts. The book used the shadow bug as an example to explain. The shadow bug could be traced back to the more powerful shadow bug. The shadow bug could be traced back to the more powerful dark bug. The dark bug could be traced back to the shadow bug, and the shadow bug could be traced back to the bloodline source, which could be traced back to the hidden butterfly. This was a terrifying king-level blood beast with the ability to conceal itself. Its strength was comparable to that of a king-level blood warrior. Due to the uniqueness of its ability to conceal itself, ordinary king-level blood warriors were no match for it. It had once appeared in the Purple Moon Kingdom. The Richardson royal family had used all their resources and dispatched 3 king-level blood warriors, but they were still unable to stop it. The other party's ability to conceal itself was simply too difficult to guard against. When fighting it, one would be completely in the dark and would not know where the enemy was. The book was not too thick. It only had a few dozen pages, and the font was rather large. Gray easily flipped through the entire book. Gray could not help but think as he closed the book and placed it back on the bookshelf. If the theory of the origin of the bloodline is correct, then the blood technique Wolf of Wind might have a follow-up blood technique. No, I'm afraid that it can no longer be called Wolf of Wind, but some other blood technique. Even the Fergus family should be in possession of the blood arts that follow up. An adult wind wolf strength could be comparable to a murderous level warrior. This was probably the limit of the blood technique Wolf of Wind. If he wanted to progress further, he would have to cultivate a blood technique of a higher level. The father of this body, Viscount Fergus, had been a murderous level warrior for many years. After so many years, he still persisted in cultivating. It was obvious that he was not cultivating the Wolf of Wind, which had lost its effects. Instead, he was cultivating a blood technique of a higher level after Wolf of Wind. Blood Beasts Atavism Chronicles was a book that recorded historical examples of blood beasts evolving into other species. The existence of such examples proved that there was indeed a bloodline connection between different species of blood beasts. Encyclopedia of Blood Techniques was a book that recorded all the blood techniques that had appeared in the 4 great kingdoms. There are detailed descriptions of what kind of blood techniques one cultivated, what kind of performance they would have, and their abilities. Experts of the Kingdoms was a book that recorded the lives and deeds of all the blood warriors that had appeared in the 4 great kingdoms. Gray searched through the books one by one, trying to find a book that was related to the changes in his body. However, after searching through the entire bookshelf, he could not find a description that corresponded to his current situation. There were hundreds of books, many of which introduced blood beasts. There were even some that focused on investigating the habits of a particular type of blood beast. There were less than 10 books that were related to the cultivation of blood techniques. Gray flipped through them one by one, but could not find a description that was related to the changes in his body. However, in a book that recorded the habits of blood beasts, he came across the term transformation period. This referred to a special period between the growth and adulthood of blood beasts. During this period, although blood beasts were still in the growth stage, they were already close to adulthood. Their growth rate was at its fastest, and their need for various types of nutrients had increased greatly. They also had an extremely strong desire to eat. This phenomenon was rather similar to the changes that had occurred to Gray's body. The only difference was that Gray was a genuine human, while this phenomenon occurred to blood beasts. However, Gray's intuition told him that the changes that had occurred to his body were closely related to the transformation period of blood beasts. At the very least, there was some kind of special connection. However, he did not know what the specific connection was. After all, the amount of information that he currently possessed was too little. After flipping through hundreds of books, even if he only skimmed through them and skipped some titles, it was already close to noon. Gray was just about to leave the library when he saw Caroline, with her long brown hair hanging behind her head, stand up from her chair. She was also about to leave the library. "Let's go to the dining hall together." Glancing at Gray, Caroline extended an invitation to Gray. "Okay, Sister Caroline." Faced with Caroline's invitation, Gray was slightly taken aback. However, he immediately reacted and nodded in agreement. Through today's interaction, he felt that Caroline was relatively easy to get along with. At least, she was easier to get along with than the seemingly enthusiastic Madame de Milan and Bernal, as well as Elise, who had a look of contempt on her face. The other party's attitude towards him was more like facing a stranger. She was not overly enthusiastic, nor did she display any hostility. Of course, one may know a person for a long time without understanding their true nature. Gray could not let down his guard against the other party with just this little bit of interaction. Until now, the mastermind behind the assassination had still not been found. After the assassination attempt on Gray, the mastermind seemed to have disappeared. There were no more movements. However, Gray knew that the mastermind did not give up. They were definitely waiting for an opportunity to strike. However, Gray felt that the possibility of Caroline being the mastermind behind the assassination was not high. This was because he did not have any conflict of interest with Caroline. As a woman, Caroline would definitely marry out in the future. Regardless of whether Gray appeared or not, the wealth of the Fergus family did not have much to do with her. Although this world also had the saying of looking for a son-in-law, and there were even women inheriting the title of nobility, with Bernal and Elise around, the possibility of Viscount Fergus looking for a son-in-law was not high. Chapter 8. When the two of them arrived at the dining hall, the others, including Viscount Fergus, had already arrived. When they saw Gray and Caroline walking together, they all had different expressions. Viscount Fergus was gratified. Gray was able to get along well with the others in the family, and the family was able to accept Gray. This was what he wanted to see. Although he rarely asked about Gray and his sister in the past 16 years, he had to admit that in the 2 months since Gray and his sister came to the castle, he had indeed given them a lot of care, perhaps out of compensation. Of course, all of this was based on Gray's excellent talent as a blood warrior. Sarah was puzzled. She had never heard from her brother Gray that his relationship with Sister Caroline had improved. Viscountess Milan and Gray's brother Bernal were surprised at first, but then they smiled faintly. It was as if they were very gratified, like Viscount Fergus. When they saw this scene, it was unknown what they were thinking. Gray's second brother, Elise, had a cold look in his eyes, but because Viscount Fergus was present, he only asked with a slightly questioning tone, "Why did you come together?" "We were reading in the library, so we came together," Caroline casually explained. She did not deliberately say that her relationship with Gray was distant, but also did not say that she was close. This was her current position in the family. "You were in the library this morning?" Viscount Fergus showed great interest in Gray's visit to the library and asked Gray. "Yes, father." Gray explained. "I felt that I lacked understanding about blood fiends and blood spells, so I went to the library to find some related books to read. Reading books is a good habit. It can increase your knowledge and experience." Viscount Fergus nodded with satisfaction. "When you have time, you can go take a look. Knowledge and experience are essential for nobles." "I will," Gray agreed. Even if Viscount Fergus didn't say it, he would still do it. Coming from the world of information explosion in his previous life, he naturally understood the importance of knowledge. Hearing Viscount Fergus's words, Bernal, who was sitting opposite Gray, couldn't help but reveal a trace of gloominess in his eyes. From the conversation between Viscount Fergus and Gray, he could feel that Viscount Fergus cared about Gray. This kind of care was not inferior to how he treated himself. Moreover, the word noble at the end had greatly touched his nerves. In the Purple Moon Kingdom, the Flame Kingdom, the Crimson Kingdom, and the Jewel Kingdom, the title of nobility was not something that could be casually given. Even if one's father was a noble, one's children could not be called a noble unless they were granted or inherited the title of nobility. Although Viscount Fergus just said it unintentionally, it revealed the image of letting Grey inherit the title of nobility, which made him feel a deep sense of crisis. Among the nobles, the title of nobility was generally inherited by the eldest son born to the wife. Illegitimate children had no right of inheritance, but there were exceptions. If a noble applied to the kingdom and was recognized by the kingdom, even an illegitimate child would be able to inherit the title. This kind of thing had happened several times in the history of the Purple Moon Kingdom, so he could not help but be vigilant. Viscount Mrs. Milan's face became slightly gloomy like him. Obviously, she also thought of this layer. Her whole face was not good, and she almost couldn't maintain her usual elegance. Lunch ended in a slightly dull atmosphere. As Grey, who was the last to finish eating, put down the table knife and silver fork, Viscount Fergus coughed lightly and said, "There's a group of bandits near the southwest border of the territory. I'll leave the castle tomorrow to eliminate them." "Master, is the situation serious?" Hearing this, Viscount Mrs. Milan frowned deeply, and the others couldn't help but worry. Even Grey was no exception at this time. He was now relying on the Fergus family for a living. If the Fergus family's interests were damaged, he would also be affected. Most of the expenses of the nobles came from the taxes of the territory. For the nobles, the territory was the foundation of everything. If the bandits' destruction was too serious, the loss of the territory would be too great, and the tax income would be reduced. His current luxurious life would inevitably be severely reduced. Although it hadn't been long since he came to this world, he was already infatuated with this kind of luxurious life of living in a huge castle and being served by dozens of people. Moreover, the benefits of the blood wolf once a month were obvious. Just a cup of it increased his strength by a lot. The value of this kind of thing was obviously not cheap, and it required a lot of money to buy. If the territory was seriously damaged, this kind of supply would probably be interrupted. According to the information obtained, the strength of this group of bandits isn't that strong. It's just that they don't have a fixed gathering place and often move. Viscount Fergus waved his hand. Fortunately, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Although it was rare for a powerful blood warrior to appear among the roaming bandits, and powerful blood warriors could usually easily find a good job, it was not always the case. In the kingdom, there would occasionally be some strong blood warriors who were wanted by the kingdom because of their mistakes and joined the bandit group. Moreover, some nobles would also train some bandits to achieve the goal of quickly amassing wealth and attacking the enemy family. So don't worry, it's not too serious. Viscount Fergus concluded. "Father, can you bring me along?" Just when everyone breathed a sigh of relief, Bernal's eyes moved and he opened his mouth. Viscount Fergus looked at Bernal in surprise. His eyes were filled with gratification, and he was obviously very satisfied with Bernal's actions. However, after some consideration, he shook his head and said, "The time spent this time should be longer, and there isn't much value in gaining experience. Next time, if there is a suitable opportunity, I will bring you along. I look forward to the opportunity for us father and son to go to the battlefield together." "Yes, father." Bernal's face was slightly regretful, but he was rather happy in his heart. Everyone could see that his performance just now had added a lot of points to him in Viscount Fergus's heart. The next morning, after being sent off by Grey and the others, Viscount Fergus, who was wearing a golden battle suit and had a head full of golden hair, exuding a faint aura of majesty, rode a war horse with blood-red hair. He led more than 300 armored warriors on war horses and left the castle in a grandiose manner. Behind him, at a place slightly behind him, were two middle-aged men. One of the middle-aged men was wearing a brown battle suit. He was tall and sturdy, and his face was square. There was an obvious killing intent on his face. He was Baron Gardner Kipling, who was in theft by the Fergus family 10 years ago. He had the strength of an upper blood warrior. The other middle-aged man was wearing a beige battle suit. He was of medium build and had a strand of beard on his chin. His face was slightly rigid. He came from the Ricardo family, a Baron family in theft by the Fergus family 50 years ago. He was Baron Gerbert Ricardo of this generation of the Ricardo family. He also had the strength of an upper blood warrior. Behind the two of them, there were 7 men in black battle suits. The 7 of them were all lords. 2 barons, 7 lords, and Lord Lynn Niassen, who was in charge of guarding the castle. These were all the nobles within the Fergus family's territory. Generally speaking, a viscount could be in theft with 3 barons and 10 lords. A count could be in theft with 3 viscounts and 10 lords. Above that, marquises, dukes, and so on. Because these bandits were roaming everywhere, they needed to be split into several groups to search for them. Therefore, Viscount Fergus had conscripted all the nobles and warriors within his territory. The nobles of this world have so much power. Not only can they infect lower nobles, but they can also openly command an army. Watching Viscount Fergus and his entourage ride off into the distance, Grey's heart surged with emotion. He couldn't help but feel a trace of desire to become a noble. In his eyes, the nobles of this world were practically local tyrants who ruled over their own territories. Not only did they have the right to self-rule their territory, but they also had the right to infect and dismiss nobles and officials. They could also openly recruit and train an army. There was even no limit to the number of troops they could recruit. Of course, considering the ability of the territory to support them, the number of troops that each noble could support was limited. Even so, it was already extremely impressive. In reality, it wasn't just Grey. Seeing such a scene, even Bernal and Elise's eyes couldn't help but blaze with passion. The feeling of commanding a troop of over 300 cavalry was something that the two of them yearned for. Only when the troop had disappeared from sight did the people in the castle return to the castle. Grey headed to a secluded area of the castle that he'd found earlier and prepared to begin his training for the day. Although the progress of his training was gratifying, and he should be able to become a low-level blood warrior again in at most a month, he still hoped that this time would be faster. Therefore, he never slacked off in his training every day. Not long after he left, Elise looked gloomily at the male servant following behind her. "Do you know where that fellow is training now?" The male servant following her was a man in his 20s. He had some freckles on his face and a shrewd look in his eyes. When he heard her question, he quickly replied, "I've already asked. He's near the secluded house in the south of the castle." "Lead the way. I like to see what he's up to." Elise snorted coldly and followed the male servant towards the secluded house where Grey usually trained. Chapter 9. The main building of the Fergus family castle was a pointed building made of white stone. There were a few low houses built around it, and there was a garden, a training ground, a horse farm, and many other places. The outermost layer of the castle was a tall wall that allowed people to walk on it, as well as a sentry tower. Other than being used as a kitchen, some of the low houses were used as servants' quarters, while others were used as warehouses to store miscellaneous items. In the south of the castle, there was a house filled with miscellaneous items. Because it was filled with items that were rarely used, the castle's servants rarely came here. Beside the house, there was an open space of about 100 square meters. The open space was paved with stone slabs, but because few people came here, it was rarely cleaned. From time to time, clusters of weeds could be seen between the cracks of the stone slabs. This was the secluded place that Grey had found to train. After arriving here and confirming that there was no one else around, Grey began to train. Crawl, pounce, bite, face up, practicing the blood technique that he had evolved from the wind wolf. He was like a real wind wolf, waiting for prey, pouncing on it, biting it, and roaring at the sky. His body felt slightly numb. That was the blood of the wind wolf that had been implanted in his body. Under the stimulation of the blood technique, Wolf of Wind, it started to become active and gradually strengthened his body. Blood implantation was the only way to fight against the blood fiends that the humans of this world had researched over a long period of time. With it, the blood technique would become extraordinary. It was not like the Xing Yi fist in his previous life, which only needed the form, but also the essence of the technique. Compared to the blood fiends, the human body was thin and weak. Even an adult armed with a weapon could at most fight against a normal ferocious beast, but not against a blood fiend. Therefore, the method of implanting the blood of the blood fiends was devised. Although the human body that was implanted with the blood of the blood fiends was very different from the blood fiends, in essence, there was not much difference between them. It was just that they were still in their infancy stage, and their strength was far from the level of an adult blood fiend. In fact, when a person cultivated a blood technique to the extreme, it would not be obvious during normal times. However, in an intense battle, some of the characteristics of the corresponding blood fiend would appear. For example, if Gray cultivated the Wolf of Wind to the limit, he would become a ferocious warrior whose strength was comparable to an adult wind wolf. During an intense battle, he would grow the sharp claws and fangs of a wolf. An hour later, with a low growl, Gray, who had maintained the pouncing posture for a full 10 minutes, stopped his training. He was sweating profusely, and his chest was like a windmill as he panted heavily. The muscles all over his body were sore, but at the same time, there was a sense of fullness brought about by strength. Although he had yet to become a lower blood warrior, he was now only 16 years old. In terms of strength and physical strength, he was no weaker than a healthy adult. After a while, his breathing became stable. Wiping the sweat on his forehead, Gray walked towards the bathroom of the castle. Elise, who had a male servant by her side, quietly watched Gray leave in a house filled with junk near the empty space where Gray was cultivating. Young Master Elise, young Master Gray hasn't finished his second round of training. Why did he stop? The freckled male servant by her side hesitated for a moment before asking in puzzlement. Viscount Fergus's family wouldn't ask their servants to avoid training in blood techniques. This was because the true essence of blood techniques was the implantation of blood fiends' bloodlines, and this couldn't be secretly learned. In addition to the precious essence of blood, it also required a set of medicinal formulas. Without a set of medicinal formulas, even if one had the essence of blood, it could at most be used as a tonic and could not be used to implant blood fiends' bloodlines. He often watched Elise and the others cultivate and knew that the physical strength of a lower blood warrior was enough to cultivate the blood technique twice in a row. However, he had clearly seen Gray stop halfway through his second round of training. I can't be sure yet, but it's very likely that there's a problem with this fellow's body due to his injuries last time. An indescribable expression flashed through Elise's eyes. A problem with his body? How could it be? The freckled male servant exclaimed in surprise, his face full of shock. If there really was a problem with young Master Gray's training, then it would be a serious matter. As servants, they could naturally see how much the Lord Viscount valued young Master Gray. They could even faintly feel that the Lord Viscount valued young Master Gray more than young Master Elise. However, young Master Gray's talent was indeed exceptional. He had cultivated to the level of a lower blood warrior in a mere year. According to what they knew, young Master Elise had spent a full 2.5 years. If young Master Gray, whom the Lord Viscount had placed such high hopes on, really had a problem with his body, then the entire castle would probably experience a huge earthquake. Young Master Elise, could there be a mistake? The freckled male servant still had traces of shock on his face. Whether there's a mistake or not, we'll know once we test him. The expression in Elise's eyes turned cold. Does young Master Elise want to have a duel with young Master Gray? The freckled male servant's eyes turned as he immediately thought of Elise's plan. The best way to ascertain someone's strength was naturally to duel with them. However, if young Master Gray's body really has a problem, then I'm afraid he won't agree. He quickly furrowed his brows as he considered the feasibility of a duel. Then I'll find an opportunity that he can't refuse. A trace of coldness appeared at the corner of Elise's mouth. When Father returns, I'll apply for a duel with him. As long as Father allows it, he won't be able to refuse even if he wants to. Moreover, this will let Father know that there's a problem with his body. Leaving the empty space where he usually trained, Gray passed through a room with a window. He had his back facing the room. The originally calm expression on his face now had a trace of gloom. This is troublesome. It seems that I've already aroused suspicion. As he turned to leave the empty space, he noticed a blurry figure next to the window. Evidently, he did not head to the training field to train, but instead chose to train in a remote place. This had already aroused suspicion. Although he did not know who the person in the room was, there was no doubt that this person was definitely not a friend. In the entire castle, other than his sister Sarah, who shared the same father and mother, only his personal maid Barbara could be considered an ally. In this world, to a certain extent, a personal maid was equivalent to a personal item. She was bound to her master for good or ill, and had the right and duty to take care of her master in all aspects. Many personal maids were even the initiators of nobles. It was clear that the person next to the window was not one of these two. If it was them, they would not have left without informing him. As expected, they were still lured here. Although he knew that it would definitely arouse suspicion and prying eyes, Gray did not think that it would come so quickly. With his current training speed, he only needed to conceal it for a month to recover the strength of a low-level blood warrior and completely eliminate the hidden danger of his strength being exposed. Unfortunately, it seemed that concealing it for a month was completely impossible. He had thought of not training the blood technique for a month. After all, his current physical condition was rather special. Even if he did not train the blood technique, his physical fitness would still improve rapidly. It would just be slower than when he trained the blood technique. However, after careful consideration, he rejected this idea. Doing so would only arouse more suspicion. At the same time, it would also arouse the dissatisfaction of Viscount Fergus, his protective umbrella. Dissatisfaction was secondary. What he was afraid of was that Viscount Fergus would personally supervise his training in order to urge him on. This would instead backfire and expose his current situation even faster. The only fortunate thing is that Viscount Fergus has already gone to eliminate roaming bandits in his territory. The Viscount's wife does not have the authority to chase me out of the castle. The Viscount's wife obviously did not have the authority to chase out a child who had been brought into the castle by Viscount Fergus. If she did, Gray would have been chased out long ago. Even if Gray's physical condition had already been exposed, he would definitely wait until the Viscount returned before making the final decision. However, even if that's the case, there's definitely less than a month left. I don't know how long Viscount Fergus will take to clear out the roaming bandits, but it shouldn't take as long as a month. No, maybe it won't take a month. Suddenly, Gray's eyes lit up as he thought of another point. As a powerful creature whose adult strength could reach the level of a ferocious blood warrior, the blood of a blood beast was obviously rich in nutrients. The fact that a cup of blood had greatly improved his physical fitness was the best proof. If nothing unexpected happened, his physical fitness should also be greatly improved the next time he took it, saving him half a month's time. It had already been half a month since he last took it. At most, there was another half a month before he could receive the next month's portion. Half a month's rapid improvement in strength, in addition to the half a month's time saved by the blood of the blood wolf. Half a month should be enough to raise my strength to that of a low-level blood warrior. Half a month's time? I don't know if there's enough time. Can I make it before Viscount Fergus returns? Gray's eyes were filled with worry. Now I can only take one step at a time. Moreover, even if my physical condition is exposed, I might not be chased out of the castle. During this period of time, he could clearly feel that Viscount Fergus valued the innate talent of this body. Therefore, even if his physical condition was exposed, as long as it was not so bad that it could not be cured, there was still a possibility that he would not be chased out of the castle. Gray thought as he walked towards the main building of the castle. Unknowingly, he had almost reached the highest three-story building in the castle. He could already see servants going in and out of the building. Chapter 10. Time passed as Gray cultivated without fail every day and went to the library to read. Feeling the lack of knowledge, he understood the importance of knowledge better than anyone else. Although he had already given up on finding out the reason for his current condition from the books, he still went to the library every day to read. Half a month later, in the empty space beside the house on the south side of the castle. Huh. With a low growl, Gray, who maintained the posture of a wolf tearing at its prey, panted heavily and stopped cultivating. Because his body was in the midst of that inexplicable transformation, his strength had increased rapidly. In half a month, he had gone from being able to perform the second and third positions with difficulty to the second and third positions. His improvement was terrifying. At this rate of improvement, even if he didn't consume the wind wolf blood that could increase his cultivation speed, it was enough for him to go from the initial contact with cultivation to a lower-level blood warrior in 2 months. This was a terrifying speed of improvement. The original owner of this body had spent a full year to go from initial contact with cultivation to a lower-level blood warrior. Even so, Viscount Fergus had regarded him as a genius and received him into the castle for training. In comparison, one could see how terrifying the cultivation speed of advancing to a lower-level blood warrior in 2 months was. Gray knew that all of this was thanks to that inexplicable transformation of his body. With regards to this transformation, Gray was now both worried and hopeful. He seemed to be rather hesitant. Because of the unknown, he didn't know what the final result of this transformation would be. Would it cause irreparable damage to his body? Would it cause him to die not long after possession? Therefore, he was worried, because the transformation had allowed his strength to increase at an unimaginable speed. The benefits were visible. Other than his increased appetite, there were no disadvantages for the time being. Therefore, he hoped that this transformation of his body would continue, so that he would quickly have the ability to protect himself in this insecure world. I don't know who was spying on me in the house last time, but they didn't spread the news of my body's problems. I'm afraid they wanted to wait for Viscount Fergus to return to the castle before directly informing him. However, I'm afraid he didn't expect that the situation of the bandits in the territory was worse than he thought. Viscount Fergus still hasn't returned to the castle. Today is the day to receive the Blood Wolf's blood. As long as I take the Blood Wolf's blood, my strength should be restored to that of a low-level blood warrior. At that time, even if he tells Viscount Fergus, I won't be afraid. Thinking of the Blood Wolf's blood that he was about to obtain, Gray's eyes could not help but become extremely bright. By taking the blood of the Blood Wolf and restoring the strength of a lower blood warrior, the crisis caused by the problems in his body could be completely eliminated. After eliminating this crisis, as long as he didn't leave the castle or do anything out of line, his safety should be guaranteed. After all, Viscount Fergus still valued his genius son very much. My strength has returned to that of a low-level blood warrior. My previous guess about whether the body's metamorphosis was due to the fact that the body's original owner's blood power had not disappeared should be able to come to a conclusion soon. If the metamorphosis of his body ended after his strength reached that of a low-level blood warrior and no longer increased as rapidly as before, then it could basically be confirmed that this metamorphosis was due to the fact that the previous blood power had not disappeared. And if his strength could still increase as rapidly as before after his strength reached that of a low-level blood warrior, then the previous blood power should have indeed disappeared. The metamorphosis of his body was related to the disappearance of the blood power, but the correlation was definitely not big. In his heart, he hoped that the second situation would occur. In this world, he really lacked a sense of security. He urgently wanted to improve his strength and gain the ability to protect himself. Of course, the specific situation could only be known after he took today's Blood Wolf's blood and his strength returned to that of a low-level blood warrior. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel expectant. He was also looking forward to the Blood Wolf's blood that almost made him vomit a month ago. After finishing his practice, Gray did not go to the bathroom. Instead, he went straight to his bedroom and waited for the maid, Barbara, to bring his blood. If nothing unexpected happened, he would sweat profusely after taking the Blood Wolf's blood, so he simply endured it and went to take a bath after taking it. On the 3rd floor of the castle, Barbara, who had received Gray's Blood Wolf's blood for this month from Madame Milan, was in a good mood as she carried a tray filled with Blood Wolf's blood and prepared to send it to Gray. Knowing that Gray was highly valued by Viscount Fergus and had a powerful blood warrior's cultivation talent, the other maids were very envious of her, who had become Grey's personal maid. As a maid, she had no right to decide her own marriage. If nothing unexpected happened, she would be married out of the castle in the future and follow a mediocre man. She would worry about daily necessities and spend the rest of her life bumpy and bumpy. But a personal maid was different. If she could gain the favor of the young master she served and become his bed partner, although she could not become his wife in the future, she would not have to worry about food and clothing. She would certainly enjoy the service of a servant for the rest of her life. Moreover, the person she was serving now was not an ordinary person. He was a child highly valued by Viscount Fergus and also had a powerful blood warrior's talent. His future was bound to be bright. Therefore, she did not have the slightest resistance to becoming Grey's personal maid. On the contrary, she was very happy. Every time the other maids looked at her with envy, she could not help but feel a burst of vanity in her heart. The only regretful thing was that she had already been with young Master Grey for more than 3 months, but young Master Grey still had not touched her. Was it because she lacked charm? Walking on the corridor of the 3rd floor, 2 people appeared in front of her. One of them was a handsome blonde youth, wearing a lake blue shirt and pants embroidered with golden patterns and high-end black boots. The other person was a man with freckles on his face, wearing a male servant's uniform with black and white as the main theme. Young Master Elise. Carrying the tray, she retreated to the side of the corridor and respectfully bowed to the handsome blonde youth. These 2 people were the castle's second young master, Elise, and his personal maid. But what surprised her was that the 2 did not walk past her, but instead stopped by her side. "Give me this portion of the blood wolf's blood." Glancing at the tray in Babla's hands, Elise said with narrowed eyes. Hearing Elise's words, Babla's face stiffened and she opened her mouth. "Young Master Elise, this is young Master Grey's portion. Your portion is still with the madam." "I know it's his." A cold smile appeared on Elise's face. Extending her hand, the strength of a low-level blood warrior allowed her to easily lift the bronze cup containing the blood wolf's blood from the tray in Babla's hands. Not a single drop of the blood wolf's blood spilled from the cup. "Young Master Elise, that belongs to young Master Grey. You can't take it." Looking at the empty tray and the bronze cup in Elise's hands, Babla's expression changed drastically as she argued emotionally. She knew how precious the blood wolf's blood was. If the blood wolf's blood was taken from her hands, she would not be able to answer to young Master Grey. Slap! Suddenly, a palm appeared and ruthlessly slapped her face. She fell to the ground uncontrollably, and the tray in her hands also fell to the ground with a clatter. If young Master Grey wants something, just hand it over obediently. Why are you talking so much nonsense? The one who attacked was the freckled manservant beside her. He slapped Barbara to the ground with a vicious look on his face and spoke viciously. Originally, he did not dare to offend Grey. Although Grey was an illegitimate child, he was the illegitimate child that Viscount Fergus valued greatly. He was not someone a servant like him could offend. However, after knowing that there was a problem with Grey's body, he could not help but become bolder. He wanted to use the method of slapping Grey's made to show his loyalty to Elise. He looked at Elise, and, as expected, a trace of approval appeared in her eyes. He was delighted and quickly followed Elise, no longer caring about Babla, who had been slapped to the ground. Feeling the burning pain on her face where the freckled servant had slapped her with one hand, Babla used her other hand to support herself against the wall as she stood up. She looked at Elise and the freckled servant in the distance. Her face was filled with anxiety, worry, and grievance. Her eyes were slightly red, and tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. She did not chase after Elise and the freckled servant. Instead, she quickly turned and jogged toward Grey's bedroom on the 2nd floor. In this situation, only young Master Grey had a chance of retrieving the blood wolf's blood. Bang, bang, bang. There was a knock on the door. Grey looked at the bedroom door and spoke. "Come in." If he was not wrong, it should be Babla who had brought the blood wolf's blood. The door creaked open, and a tall, fair-skinned Babla, dressed in black and white maid attire, pushed open the door and walked in. Grey looked at her hands, but found that they were empty. He raised his head to look at her face, and his eyes could not help but emit flames of anger. There was a clear red palm print on the left side of Babala's beautiful face. At the same time, the corner of her eyes were slightly red. She had obviously been bullied. Who did this? Gray's face was filled with anger. In the more than a month since he had been reborn into this world, he had been served by the maid Babala. He had enjoyed her service and was very satisfied with it. But now Babala had been slapped. It would have been fine if it had been an ordinary servant, but Babala was his personal maid. To a certain extent, she could be considered as his personal belonging. Even the other Viscount's children in the castle did not have the right to teach her a lesson without his consent. One could imagine his anger. It was young Master Elise's personal servant, Neeson. Young Master Gray, your blood wolf's blood this month was snatched away by young Master Elise. Babala said with a choked voice. Chapter 11. Don't worry. I'll break whichever hand he used to hit you. Gray took out a handkerchief and handed it to Barbara. His eyes were gloomy. Although Barbara was the one who had been hit, there was no doubt that he was the one who had provoked her. After all, Barbara was his personal maid and his personal belonging. A manservant actually had the guts to provoke him. This must have been instigated by the second brother of this body, Elise. Although Elise usually gives me the cold shoulder, she knows her limits very well. She obviously doesn't dare to provoke me too much. But now she actually dares to order her servant to humiliate me. There must be a reason. Gray pondered in his heart. Now it seems that he was the one who had been spying on me from the hut. Elise must have dared to do this because she knew that there was something wrong with his body. She was confident that she could take him down in front of Viscount Fergus. Evidently, she had nothing to fear. But I must get the blood wolf blood back. Now he only needed to consume one more portion of blood to regain the strength of a low-level blood warrior. Therefore, he had to get this blood back. But even if I were to fight now, I probably wouldn't be Elise's match. Elise's talent for training was a bit trashy. It took her 2.5 years to cultivate the power of blood and raise her strength to that of a low-level blood warrior. Her aptitude was the worst among the 3 children of Viscount Fergus and Madame de Milan. But after all, she was already a low-level blood warrior and was definitely stronger than him now. How should I get back? After pondering for a moment, Gray already had an idea. At this time, Barbara had stopped crying. He looked at her apologetically. After all, she had been hit entirely because of him. Follow me. He led Barbara downstairs and walked out of the main building of the castle, not directly to Elise's bedroom. They walked towards an exquisite house that was slightly lower than the castle. After entering the house and reporting their identities, Gray and Babala were led by a servant to the living room opposite the door. There were wooden tables, chairs, and coffee tables in the living room, and some oil paintings on the walls. Although the decorations were not as luxurious as the main building of the castle, it was still considered exquisite. Not long after, a man with a black mustache walked over. The man's face was thin, and he wore an earthy yellow robe and a pair of yellow leather boots. He wasn't very tall, only a little over 7 meters. Young Master Gray, why are you here? When he saw Gray, his face was full of smiles as he sat in the chair opposite Gray. His name was Lin Nyasin, and he had the strength of an upper-level blood warrior. He was the commander of the castle guards and also a lord. When Viscount Fergus was not in the castle, he commanded all the guards in the castle to protect the safety of the castle. He wasn't too familiar with Gray. After all, Gray had only been in the castle for 3 months. However, he had an extremely strong interest in befriending this illegitimate son of Viscount Fergus. On one hand, it was because of the talent that Viscount Fergus had displayed. On the other hand, it was because he knew some inside information. He knew that Viscount Fergus had brought Gray into the castle to nurture him. Greetings, Lord Lind. To tell you the truth, I'm here to ask for help. Because the blood of the blood wolf had already fallen into Elise's hands and could be consumed at any time, there was no time to talk to him. Therefore, Gray chose the simplest and most crude way to get straight to the point. After possessing this body, he had met Lind a few times in the past month in the castle. He could clearly feel Lind's enthusiasm towards him. Therefore, after knowing that the blood of the blood wolf had been taken by Elise, he didn't immediately look for Elise. Instead, he looked for Lind. Young Master Gray, I don't know what you need. As long as I can do it, I will definitely not refuse. Hearing Gray's straightforward words, Lynn's eyes lit up. He had been looking for an opportunity to curry favor with Gray, and now the opportunity had come. Lord Lind, you should know that today is the day when the castle distributes the blood of the Blood Wolf. However, before my share was in my hands, it was snatched away by my second brother. Gray said with a face full of anger. There was no need to pretend. He was really angry now. A mere servant dared to provoke him. If he let this matter go, who knows how he would be bullied in the castle in the future. To snatch. Young Master Gray's share. Young Master Elise has gone too far this time. Lind hesitated for a moment before speaking up for the injustice. However, in his heart, he was muttering. He originally wanted to use Gray's request to curry favor with Gray. However, he didn't expect that Gray's first request would make things difficult for him. After all, this matter involved the other son of the Viscount. Both sides are the Viscount's sons. No matter which side he helped, he would inevitably offend the other side. Therefore, he hesitated. Lynn's hesitation was naturally detected by Gray, who didn't have the soul of a 16-year-old boy living in his body. He continued to speak angrily. Although my father will definitely be able to compensate for the blood taken from me today when he comes back, I really can't take this lying down. Lord Linda, you have to help me get the blood back. Lynn's expression didn't change, but in his heart, he was calculating the gains and losses of this matter. On the one hand, he would gain the gratitude of young Master Gray and establish an extraordinarily close relationship with him. After all, he had offended young Master Elise because of young Master Gray. On the other hand, the losses were obvious. If he acted, he was afraid that he would thoroughly offend young Master Elise. Even Madame de Milan wouldn't be too fond of him. The gains and losses quickly flashed through his mind, and he quickly came to a decision. Let's do it. Because of that insider information, he was extremely optimistic about Gray. This was also why he treated Gray more warmly than the two sons of the Viscount and his wife, even though Gray was clearly an illegitimate son. Moreover, it was best to make friends while the other party was still young. If he waited until the other party had his own power, then it would be difficult to make friends with them. Therefore, like him, many small nobles like to take up an official position in a large noble family. On one hand, the benefits were good, and on the other hand, they wanted to build a good relationship with the next generation of the noble family while they were still young. As a lord, he naturally had the ambition to become a baron. According to the insider information, if he could really hold onto young Master Gray's thigh, he would definitely become a baron in the future. Although it wasn't certain, the possibility was definitely very high. Young Master Elise has indeed gone overboard this time. Young Master Gray, don't worry, I will help you take back your portion of the blood. Lind said with awe-inspiring righteousness. That's great, Lord Lind. Thank you so much. Gray showed a timely expression of gratitude, which was ignored by Lin Rue. Ki Tsong Qinghu School? Nag Qinghu. As long as he could settle today's matter, he would definitely leave an extremely good impression in this lord's heart. After all, he had helped him when he had no power or influence. How could adding flowers to a brocade compare to providing charcoal in snowy weather? On the second floor of the castle, in Elise's bedroom facing the south, Elise looked at the 2 cups of blood on the tray. Smelling the scent of blood, she couldn't help but reveal a trace of intoxication. 2 cups of blood. Once she consumed all of them, her strength would probably increase by a large margin. Unfortunately, such an opportunity was rare, and there probably wouldn't be a next time. Beside her, the freckled servant glanced at the 2 cups of blood on the table, then looked at Elise and said hesitantly, Young Master Elise, won't this cause the Viscount to be displeased? What if he complains to the Viscount when he returns? If there are no problems with his body, I wouldn't dare. As for now, he'll soon be beaten back to his original state. I'm taking his portion so that he won't waste it. Elise said disdainfully. Thud, thud, thud. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Go open the door. Yes. Upon receiving the order, the freckled servant Neeson walked to the bedroom door and opened it. A man with a mustache entered his sight. Of course, he knew this person. Lord Linda, you're looking for young Master Elise. Halfway through his sentence, he couldn't help but pause because he saw Gray and Babla, who were slightly behind Linda. Thud! At this moment, Gray took a step forward and kicked the freckled servant Neeson back into the bedroom, while he darted into the bedroom. Ouch, ouch! After being kicked in the abdomen by Gray, the freckled servant cried out in pain and couldn't get up for a long time. Such a huge commotion naturally alarmed Elise. She turned around and saw Gray rushing into the bedroom, while his valet was bent over on the ground. "Glenn, how dare you come in my bedroom to make trouble?" He immediately said angrily. "You're the bold one, second brother. You even dared to snatch the blood of the blood fiends that Father distributed to me. Do you still have any respect for Father?" Gray didn't budge an inch. He was in the right in this matter. Even if this matter was reported to the Viscount, he wasn't afraid at all. "Humph, you have a sharp tongue. Let me, your older brother, teach you a lesson." Knowing that she was in the wrong, Elise didn't waste any more words. Her 5 fingers formed a claw, and with a whoosh, she quickly pounced and locked her 5 fingers on Gray's throat. Although he saw Linda, who came in with Gray, he didn't pay attention to him. With his identity as the Viscount's son, he believed that Linda wouldn't dare to get involved in his fight with Gray. Swish! The wolf's favorite method was to bite the throat of its prey and deliver a fatal blow. After practicing the blood technique, Wind Wolf, and practicing the combat style of the Wind Wolf countless times, Elise couldn't help but like this combat style. Chapter 12. Slap, slap, slap. Although he hadn't regained the strength of a lower blood warrior, he wasn't far from it. Gray quickly retreated and dodged Elise's claw. However, Alice's low-level blood warrior's reaction was also fast. Gray dodged the claw that was aimed at his throat, and then he took a step forward, his 5 fingers grabbing at Gray's right arm. Slap! At this moment, a soft sound rang out. A.I. Leezy's hand that was grabbing at Gray's wrist was firmly grasped by a skinny hand. Elise struggled but couldn't break free. She looked angrily at Linda, who was holding her wrist, and said angrily, "Linda, you dare to touch me. Young Master Elise, please don't slander me. I only stopped you from attacking young Master Gray. After all, before the Viscount left, he specifically told me to protect young Master Gray's safety." He wasn't lying. Before Viscount Fergus left, he did specifically look for him and told him to protect Gray's safety. It was from these words and actions that Viscount Fergus regarded Gray with extraordinary importance, which was why he made the decision to stand up for Gray. Seeing Elise restrained by Linda, Gray's expression didn't change, but he sighed softly in his heart. He should have been able to dodge the grab just now. But if they continued to fight like this for a dozen more times, it would be a bit difficult. Although he was already very close to becoming a lower blood warrior, he was still a bit away from becoming one. On the other hand, Elise was already a genuine lower blood warrior. Go around Binlin, Disaster Atlas Mo, Jiao, Song Yun Bien 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 Funai Hawaii, Biao Gang, Shi, Fierce Pong Huani Xinhua, Xinhu, Zhong, Fierce Pong Award, Shanxi, Terpene Nightmare, Dark Disaster, Skeleton. It was clear that Elise hadn't had time to take his blood. Not only his, she hadn't even had time to take her own. Gray was not in a hurry to retrieve the blood of the blood fiends. Instead, he walked towards the freckled servant Neeson, who had struggled to stand up while clutching his stomach after being kicked into the house. Neeson had a hostile look on his face. Even if Elise was behind it, it was still extremely daring for a mere manservant to dare to make things difficult for him. He asked, looking back at Barbara, "Which hand did he hit you with?" "Right hand." The part of her face that had been slapped still hurt, and it seemed to have swollen. Bobulus said with grievance. "Right hand?" Turning around, Gray clenched his fist and punched Neeson's arm. Crack! The sound of bones breaking could be heard. The freckled servant Neeson's right forearm was bent unnaturally. He was just an ordinary person who couldn't even beat a normal soldier, so naturally, his physical fitness wouldn't be that strong. After being punched by Sean, whose strength was close to that of a low-level blood warrior, his arm bones were immediately broken. Not expecting Gray to be so ruthless, the freckled servant Neeson roared in pain and struggled wildly, trying to attack Gray again. Bang! Gray punched again, this time on the chest of the freckled servant Neeson, sending him flying and crashing into the wall. He screamed continuously and didn't get up for a long time. Regardless of the other party's miserable state, as long as it didn't kill him, he wouldn't be afraid even if the Viscount complained. After all, he was in the right today. Gray looked at Babla and said, "Bring the blood of the blood fiends to my bedroom." After some thought, Gray added, "Bring both of them away." "Gray, don't you dare." Elise was already furious when she saw Gray break her valet's arm. Now that she heard that Gray was going to take away her share of the blood fiend's blood, she couldn't hold back her anger. Even with such good conditions in the castle, I still spent 2.5 years to barely become a low-level blood warrior. Second brother, it's a waste for the blood fiend's blood to remain in your hands. Why don't you lend it to me first and return it to you next time? After saying this, Gray had Babla carry the tray with the blood fiend's blood and leave Elise's room. He was in the right for breaking Neeson's arm when he attacked Babla. Only the last one, which was to take away Elise's share of the blood fiend's blood, was unreasonable. His motive for doing this wasn't just to take revenge on Elise, but for a deeper reason. Although he estimated that his strength would rise to that of a low-level blood warrior after consuming the blood fiend's blood again, it was only an estimate after all, and he couldn't be sure. He had only consumed the blood fiend's blood once since he'd taken over this body, and he didn't know if the effects would be as good the next time. Therefore, he seized the opportunity to snatch AI Lizzy's portion of blood beast blood as well. With 2 portions of blood beast blood, he estimated that he would be able to cultivate the power of blood again and regain his strength as a low-level blood warrior. It should be a cinch, seeing that Gray had indeed taken away his portion of crimson blood as well. Alice was so angry that he was about to go crazy. If it weren't for the fact that Linda, a high-ranking blood warrior, had restrained him, he would definitely have pounced on Gray again. "Gray, don't be so arrogant. When Father comes back, I'll teach you a lesson. Don't think that I don't know that there's something wrong with your body. There's something wrong with my body? Second brother, do you really think that I don't know that you're hiding in the house? Do you really think that I stopped training after reaching my limit?" Gray didn't even bother to turn around, his face full of contempt. "If you really think that there's something wrong with me, you can tell Father when he comes back." After saying this, Gray immediately left Elise's bedroom. "Excuse me, young Master Elise." After he left Elise's bedroom, Linda released Elise's hand and also left Elise's room. In his opinion, Gray had injured the freckled footman Neeson and snatched Elise's share of Bloodfiend's blood. It was just a normal child's revenge mentality. As for what Elise had said about Gray's body having a problem, he didn't take it seriously. From the conversation, it wasn't hard to tell that Elise had been tricked by Gray. Evidently, Gray had sensed that Elise was spying on him and deliberately stopped training halfway. On the other hand, because Gray had snatched Elise's share of Bloodfiend's blood, he was afraid that Madame de Milan would summon him for questioning in the future. However, he wasn't afraid. When he decided to stand up for Gray, he already knew that he would offend Elise and Madame de Milan. He was a lord after all, and Madame de Milan, who didn't even have a noble title, couldn't do anything to him. As for when the Viscount returned, he estimated that there was a 90% chance that the Viscount would side with Gray. After staying in the castle for so many years, he was very clear about the Viscount's temper. He actually knew that I was hiding in the house at that time. Did he do it on purpose for me to see? Elise was obviously frightened by Gray's words before he left. She was bewildered and took a long time to recover. If he had really been tricked by Gray this time, he was afraid that even if he reported this to his father, he wouldn't be able to get anything out of it. After all, he was the one who made things difficult for Gray first, and Gray retaliated. No, that fellow must be bluffing. Maybe he only found out that I was hiding in the house when he left. His expression was cloudy and uncertain. I didn't plan to say it directly. When the time comes, I'll just challenge Gray. Whether he's a lower blood warrior or not will be clear after a battle. In the corridor, under the watchful eyes of some servants who had heard the commotion, Gray, Barbara, and Linda entered Gray's bedroom. "Lord Linda, thank you for this time," Gray said gratefully to Linda. His gratitude was sincere. Although he said that he would be able to vent his anger and receive compensation when Viscount Fergus returned, he knew his own situation well. If he didn't have the blood of a blood fiend, it would be very difficult for him to recover the strength of a lower blood warrior by the time Viscount Fergus returned. At that time, when Alice reported him, he wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but it definitely wouldn't be good. Therefore, this gratitude came from the bottom of his heart. Young Master Gray is too courteous. I'll take my leave first. If you need any help in the future, just send a servant to inform me. Sensing the sincerity in Gray's gratitude, Linda immediately felt satisfied. Offending Elise had not been in vain. With this person's potential and Viscount Fergus's goal, his future achievements would certainly be extraordinary. As someone who had helped him when he had no power or influence, Linda would certainly not be treated unfairly. After sending off Linda and having the maid Barbara stand guard outside the door, Gray looked at the 2 cups of blood on the tea table, held his breath, and drank them all in one gulp. His mouth was filled with the taste of blood. The thick smell of blood assailed his nostrils, and a feeling of nausea arose spontaneously. Gray resisted the urge to vomit. Even though it was his second time taking the blood, Gray still couldn't get used to drinking raw blood. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of steaming the blood before eating it, but after these days of reading in the library, he already knew that the blood of a blood fiend could only be maximized when it was fresh and consumed raw. The blood of the blood fiends in the castle must have been preserved using some kind of artifact to keep it as fresh as possible. As the blood slid down his throat into his stomach, Gray immediately felt the same as when he'd taken the blood of the blood fiends before, but there were also different changes. A wave of heat rose from his stomach, but it was different from the last time. It wasn't too hot and spread from his stomach to his entire body, making his whole body feel comfortably warm. At the same time, a feeling of limp numbness appeared all over his body. This feeling only appeared when he was training, but it was more intense than when he was training. Chapter 13. Gray closed his eyes slightly, feeling the changes in his body. 10 minutes. 20 minutes, 30 minutes, because it wasn't as intense as last time, where he felt as if his brain was about to be burned. Gray could clearly feel the passage of time. After about half an hour, he felt the warm and numb feeling in his body gradually disappear. After a while, the lazy and numb feeling completely disappeared. Gray opened his eyes, stood up, and continued to feel the changes in his body. He was full of energy like never before. He felt that he was now very energetic, as if he could kill a cow with a single punch. He couldn't tell if that was the case. After all, there wasn't a cow in front of him for him to attack. Moreover, with his current status in the castle, it was impossible for the castle to find a cow for him to attack, especially after the ruckus he caused today. I still haven't become a lower blood warrior. He tried to mobilize the internal organs of his body, wanting to see if his body had developed the power of blood. However, he found that although his body was already extremely strong, it still hadn't developed the power of blood. But it should be soon. I should be almost there after drinking Elise's blood. Sure enough, taking away Elise's blood was the right choice. Picking up the second cup of blood, Gray raised his head and boldly swallowed it all in one gulp. At this time, the strong smell of blood was no longer unacceptable to him. A similar feeling appeared once again. A heat that wasn't too intense rose from his stomach and spread throughout his body. A slight numbness appeared in every organ, every muscle, and every tissue in his body. At the same time, he also felt as if something was condensing in his body, following the blood channels in his body and converging towards his heart. Half an hour later, the heat and numbness subsided at the same time. Gray still had his eyes closed, carefully feeling the situation in his body. Soon he felt that in his body, in the position of his heart on the left side of his chest, there was a small lump that seemed like a foreign object, but also like something that originally belonged to him. This feeling was very strange. He could clearly feel that there was a foreign object in his heart that wasn't there before. However, this thing gave him an extremely intimate feeling, as if it had an inseparable relationship with him. It's the power of blood. When he opened his eyes, Gray's face was filled with excitement. He couldn't hide the joy on his face. With the memories of the body's original owner regarding blood force, he was very sure that this was blood force. It was a sign that his strength had reached the level of a low-level blood warrior. In other words, from now on, he was a genuine low-level blood warrior. The reason why blood fiends were called blood fiends was because their power came from the blood in their bodies. Blood was the source of their power. Through the implantation of the blood beast bloodline and the cultivation of the corresponding blood beast blood arts, a special power would be born in the most important part of the blood circulation, the heart. This was the power of blood, the most fundamental ability of a blood warrior. A blood warrior without blood force was not a true blood warrior. This was a widely spread saying among the blood warriors. From this, one could see the importance of blood force to a blood warrior. The danger of being exposed has finally been resolved. Gray heaved a long sigh of relief. His strength had returned to the level of a low-level blood warrior. He was no longer the fake low-level blood warrior from before. He no longer had to worry about being exposed and no longer had to live in fear all day long. If Elise had really intended to wait for Viscount Fergus to return and report him, then Elise's expression would definitely be very interesting to watch. In 1 month, plus 3 cups of blood fiend blood, my strength has risen to the level of a low-level blood warrior from scratch. The speed of my improvement can be said to be terrifying. This strange transformation of my body, what kind of transformation is it? Gray couldn't help but think of the main factor that allowed him to rise to the level of a low-level blood warrior in a short month. The strange transformation. He was no longer as wary of this transformation as before. For the time being, he couldn't see the harm, but the benefits were obvious. At least for now, this strange transformation was beneficial and harmless to him. My strength has returned to the level of a low-level blood warrior. Whether this strange transformation is due to the fact that the power of my blood hasn't disappeared, I'll be able to observe it in the next few days. If his growth rate returned to normal in the next few days, then this strange transformation should be related to his former power of blood. It was very likely that his former power of blood hadn't disappeared, but had hidden itself for some reason. And if his growth rate remained the same in the next few days, then this strange transformation shouldn't be due to the fact that his former power of blood hadn't disappeared, but rather another unknown reason. In his heart, he hoped that the second situation would occur. The thrill of the rapid improvement of his strength made him unable to stop even if he wanted to. He naturally didn't want to stop here. Of course, the specific results could only be felt in the next few days. The first danger, the danger of being exposed, can be considered resolved. Now the main focus should be on the danger of assassination. The original owner of his body had been assassinated. The assassin had taken poison and committed suicide. The mastermind behind the scenes hadn't been found yet. Every time he thought of this, he felt a wave of uneasiness in his heart. Anyone who was targeted as an assassination target would feel uneasy. It was precisely because of this that he hadn't taken a single step out of the castle since his rebirth. No matter what, this crisis had to be resolved. Otherwise, even if he avoided the danger of being exposed, he might not be able to live for long. However, even if he was now a low-level blood warrior, it was absolutely impossible for him to deal with a mastermind hiding in the dark. Therefore, in order to deal with this mastermind, he had to borrow the power of Viscount Fergus. And only Viscount Fergus's power could deal with this mastermind behind the scenes. The only thing he could do now was to be careful of his own safety and secretly find out who the mastermind behind the scenes was. The biggest suspects were naturally Madame de Milan and the 2 brothers born of Madame de Milan. After all, his appearance had indeed blocked the path of these 3 people. Caroline could basically be ruled out. There was no conflict of interest between the 2, so it wasn't worth the risk. Of course, Madame de Milan and the 2 brothers born of Madame de Milan were only the biggest suspects. Other than that, there were other possibilities. The Fergus family had a history of more than 100 years. From the initial commoners to the current Viscount family, they must have offended many nobles and formed grudges with many of them. These nobles also had a reason to assassinate him. The original owner of his body had an outstanding talent for training as a blood warrior. His future achievements wouldn't be too low. The enemy nobles obviously didn't want him to grow. As for whether there were other reasons, Gray's current information was very limited. He couldn't deduce them at all. In the afternoon, on the south side of the castle, Gray usually cultivated in the open space near the house of miscellaneous buildings. Gray came here and began cultivating the blood technique, Wolf of Wind. On the open space, it was as if a wolf statue had appeared. At times, it maintained a crawling posture. At times, it maintained a pouncing posture. At times, it maintained a biting posture. At times, it maintained a posture facing the sky. After half an hour, Gray had already cultivated the blood technique Wolf of Wind once. Gray began the second round of cultivation. Crawling posture, pouncing posture, biting posture. This morning, Gray was just able to finish cultivating the third posture of the second round, biting posture. But now he didn't stop. His body wasn't as tired as he imagined. He continued to cultivate the fourth posture, facing the sky. 10 minutes later, he finished cultivating the fourth posture of his second round, which was also the last posture. At this point, he had already practiced the blood technique twice in a row. With this level of endurance and physical strength, he was already a genuine low-level blood warrior. Only low-level blood warriors and above could continuously practice the blood technique, Wind Wolf, twice. But Gray didn't stop because of this. Instead, he started cultivating the third round of the blood technique, Wolf of Wind. He still felt that he had some energy left. Finally, after persisting for a full 5 minutes in the first posture of the third round, crawling, he finally felt that his body had reached its limit. He couldn't maintain the crawling posture anymore. With a thud, he sat down on the ground. Thud, thud. After sitting on the ground for a while, Gray recovered some of his strength. He stood up and patted the dust off his butt. His eyes were filled with surprise. 2 rounds plus 1/8 of the third round. 2 rounds was already the limit of a beginner, low-level blood warrior. He actually managed to complete 1/8 of the third round on the basis of 2 rounds. Clearly, his current strength had not only entered the realm of a low-level blood warrior, but it had also surpassed the foundation of a beginner low-level blood warrior. Before consuming the second portion of Blood Beast blood, I should have been extremely close to the realm of a low-level blood warrior. That's why after consuming the second portion of Blood Beast blood, my realm is slightly higher than that of a beginner low-level blood warrior. Gray estimated in his heart. Phew. Breathing slightly steadied, Gray didn't leave the open space immediately. Instead, he suddenly bent down, clenched his right hand into a fist, and smashed it against a yellowish-brown slate under his feet. In that instant, he mobilized a ball of blood energy in his left chest, where his heart was, and quickly attached it to his right fist. Bang! With a muffled sound, dust flew up. The yellowish-brown slate, about 30 to 40 centimeters in length and width and 3 centimeters in thickness, that was hit by Gray's right fist started to crack from the point of impact. It spread all the way until it finally split into 6 large pieces. After smashing the slate with one punch, Gray didn't stop there. Swish! The power of blood was attached to his legs. Suddenly, he flashed out and dodged the dust before it could reach him. Not a single speck of dust landed on his body. In that instant, his speed was extremely fast. Although he didn't have any measuring tools, there was no doubt that his speed in that instant was definitely more than 10 meters per second. Chapter 14. Swish! Less than 10 meters away from the dust, Gray stopped and looked at his right hand. His originally fair and slender right hand was now a little red. At the same time, there was also a slight pain, but there was no sign of his skin being torn open. Blood Force does indeed have a certain level of protection. Seeing this, Gray nodded. With the memories of his body's original owner and the books he had read in the library, Gray had a general understanding of Blood Force. This was a mysterious force that was tempered from within the body. When attached to the body, it could harden the skin, muscles, and bones. At the same time, it could also increase the impact force or speed of this part of the body. At the same time, the characteristics of this mysterious ability were closely related to the blood technique practiced. For example, the blood technique Wind Wolf that Gray was practicing now was based on the Wind Wolf. The Wind Wolf, on the other hand, was a blood beast with average strength and physical defense among blood beasts of the same rank. Its specialty was its extremely fast running speed, which could be ranked at the top of all blood beasts of the same rank. In addition, it had the ability to spit wind blades from its mouth. Therefore, the blood force that was cultivated through the blood technique, Wind Wolf, could only be considered mediocre in terms of increasing strength and physical defense. However, it was extremely effective in terms of increasing speed. The best proof was that Gray, who had never undergone professional training, suddenly had a speed that surpassed the world champion of the 100-meter sprint in his previous life. As for the final ability to spit wind blades, only an adult wind wolf with strength comparable to a ferocious blood warrior could possess it. Gray, who had just become a low-level blood warrior, obviously could not possess it. Although the increase in strength can only be considered average, it is already extraordinary. The stone slabs that could be used as the foundation for the castle floor were all made of solid stone materials. They were 30 to 40 centimeters in length and width, and 3 centimeters in thickness. However, they were shattered by Gray's punch. Because Gray did not know much about the boxers in his previous life, he did not know if they could do it. However, even if they could, only a few boxing champions would be able to do it. Obviously, this kind of destructive power would be extremely terrifying in his previous life. It's the same for defense. Although his defense was rated as mediocre, the fact that his hand didn't split open after colliding with the stone and only turned slightly red showed that it wasn't mediocre at all. At least, that was how Gray saw it. The power of blood is indeed a terrifying ability. Unfortunately, there is too little of it. Gray sighed. He had only used the power of blood twice, once on his fists and once on his legs. However, the power of blood in his heart had almost been completely depleted after these 2 uses. Originally, it was the size of a glass ball. Now, it was only the size of a pea. At most, it could be used 1 more time. This showed that the power of blood could not be sustained for long. However, this should have something to do with the fact that I've just become a lower-level blood warrior. When my strength reaches middle-level blood warrior, or even upper-level blood warrior, the number of times I can use it should increase. As one's strength increased, the power of blood would inevitably grow stronger. When one's strength reached middle-level blood warrior or upper-level blood warrior, it was inevitable that the number of times one could use the power of blood would increase. If one's strength reached the level of a ferocious blood warrior above upper-level blood warrior, the amount of power of blood would be extremely considerable. It would probably be enough to last for a period of time. In the evening, in the castle's dining hall, the huge lotus-shaped crystal lamp was still shining brightly. Sitting at the long dining table, Madame de Milan, Bernal, Elise, Caroline, Gray, and his half-sister, Sarah, were eating separately. The atmosphere was silent. Only the sound of cutlery could be heard. Elise's gaze would occasionally glare at Gray. Evidently, she was still angry that Gray had snatched away her portion of Blood Fiend's blood this morning. Bernal and Caroline would also occasionally look at Gray. This morning, Gray and Elise's conflict had caused such a huge commotion that they were naturally alarmed. However, what they didn't expect was that Elise would be the one to suffer. This caused their impression of Gray to change once again. After being bullied by Elise, Gray didn't immediately look for Elise. Instead, he looked for the guard commander and persuaded him to stand up for him. It wasn't hard to see Gray's methods. Caroline was surprised by Gray's methods. It seemed that this younger brother in name wasn't simple. Of course, this still didn't have much to do with her. Although she was slightly dissatisfied, Elise was her half-brother after all. Compared to Gray, their relationship was closer. However, after learning that Elise was the one who provoked them first, this trace of dissatisfaction disappeared. No matter what, Gray was still her younger brother. She couldn't be too biased towards Elise. On the other hand, Bernal was more afraid. Lord Linda was actually willing to become enemies with another Viscount's daughter for Gray. The information revealed made him even more wary of Gray. Madame de Milan sat in Viscount Fergus's usual seat. Her gaze was calm, and it was impossible to tell what she was feeling at the moment. After distributing the Blood Fiend's blood in the morning, she had left the castle to participate in the aristocratic socialite exchange. She only returned in the afternoon. However, she was still the mistress of the castle. Naturally, someone would report to her about what had happened in the morning. Therefore, she definitely knew about the conflict between Gray and Elise, as well as the fact that Elise had suffered because of it. Ding! Following Gray's second dinner, everyone in the dining hall had finished eating. Although he had already reached the level of a low-level blood warrior, Gray's appetite didn't return to normal. It was still the same as before. Elise, Gray, I heard from the servants that the two of you had a big fight this morning. At this moment, Madame de Milan finally opened her mouth and spoke in a seemingly absent-minded manner. Mother, you have to help me. Gray, that fellow, stole my blood fiend's blood. Elise's eyes lit up, and she immediately took the initiative to complain. Stole blood fiend's blood? Gray, what exactly is going on? Madame de Milan's brows slightly furrowed as she looked at Gray. Seeing Madame de Milan's state, Gray's heart thumped. She naturally couldn't have only just found out that Elise's blood had been stolen. The reason why she was pretending to have found out by chance was obviously to make things difficult for him. He quickly thought about how to deal with it. A direct confrontation was obviously not appropriate, unless it was absolutely necessary. He didn't intend to do so. Although Madame de Milan was only the wife of a viscount and didn't have an actual title, she was still the mistress of the castle. During the period when Viscount Fergus wasn't in the castle, she was fully in charge of the castle. If the other party found an opportunity to make things difficult for him, he was afraid that his following days wouldn't be easy. Very quickly, he came up with an idea and immediately spoke with an aggrieved expression. It was Brother Elise who stole my blood first. I was so angry that I stole his blood as well. I'm willing to compensate Brother Elise with next month's blood. His current strength had already recovered to that of a low-level blood warrior, and there was no danger of being exposed. Even if he didn't have next month's blood, it wouldn't affect him much. Furthermore, if this matter was reported to Viscount Fergus, he would definitely compensate Elise with his blood. He might as well bring it up himself. Hearing Gray's reply, a strange look flashed across Madame de Milan's eyes. Originally, she had been prepared to take advantage of Gray's rebuttal to teach Gray a lesson. With her prestige and methods in the castle, teaching Gray a lesson naturally wouldn't be difficult. Now that Gray had admitted defeat and was willing to give next month's blood to Elise, it made things a little difficult for her. Elise wasn't in the right in this matter. She had originally wanted to use this as an excuse to punish Gray if he talked back. Now that Gray had admitted his mistake, it wasn't easy to punish him. Otherwise, it would be difficult to explain when the Viscount returned. These thoughts flashed through her mind as she spoke with a slight smile. You did go a little overboard, but this matter was Elise's fault in the first place. Furthermore, you're willing to give next month's blood to Elise, so I won't pursue this matter any further. Thank you, madam, Gray said gratefully. From beginning to end, the two of them didn't mention the freckled servant whose arm had been broken. A servant who had provoked his master was merely a lesson that he deserved. Mother, hearing Madame de Milan let Gray off just like that, Elise was instantly displeased. All right, Elise, you were in the wrong in this matter. Gray is also willing to give next month's blood to you. That's all. Madame de Milan looked at Elise and reprimanded her slightly. Yes, knowing that Madame de Milan wouldn't stand up for her, Elise could only reply unwillingly. Finally, he glared fiercely at Gray before getting up and leaving the dining hall. In his eyes, there was anger, hatred, and also fear. Chapter 15. 3 days later, a troop of more than 300 cavalrymen marched towards Viscount Fergus Castle, which was built on 3 steep hills. The leader was a middle-aged man with golden hair. He was riding a tall, blood-red warhorse and wore a golden battle suit that was smelted with precious magical metals. It sparkled under the sun. Slightly behind him was a burly man in a brown battle suit and a bearded man in a beige battle suit. Behind the two of them were 7 men in black battle attire. They were Viscount Fergus and his party that had gone to exterminate the roaming bandits. The gates of Viscount Fergus Castle were already wide open. Gray, Sarah, Madame de Milan, Bernal, Elise, Caroline, Lord Linda, 3 butlers, 2 headmaids, and many servants stood at the entrance. They had been waiting here for almost an hour. Yesterday, Viscount Fergus had already sent someone to inform them in advance. They knew that Viscount Fergus and his party would be returning today, so they had been waiting at the entrance of the castle early in the morning. Nay, Viscount Fergus rode his blood-red warhorse to the front of the castle. He jumped off the blood-red warhorse and threw the reins to a servant beside him. "Master, you're back." Madame de Milan spoke. "Father, welcome back." Gray and the others opened their mouths. "Lord Viscount, you're back." These were the voices of the 3 butlers and 2 headmaids, as well as many servants. "Yes, I'm back." Viscount Fergus had a head of golden hair and a valiant face. However, there was a hint of killing intent in his eyes, but it was quickly restrained. After chasing the roaming bandits for more than half a month, it was obvious that he had accumulated a lot of killing intent. At this moment, the 9 people following closely behind Viscount Fergus, namely the 2 barons and 7 lords, had arrived on horseback and jumped off their horses. "Master, a welcome banquet has been prepared in the castle." As the hostess, Madame de Milan, who was wearing a purple pleated dress, exuded the aura of a noble woman. "All right." Viscount Fergus nodded and immediately led the 2 barons, 7 lords, Madame de Milan, Gray, and the others to the banquet hall. As for the other soldiers, there were also banquets set up in other places in the castle. Naturally, there would be servants to lead them to the place where the banquet would be held. In the huge and spacious banquet hall, there were 3 lotus-shaped crystal lamps hanging from the ceiling. Because it was daytime, they were not lit. He was surrounded by brownish-yellow wooden walls. There were oil paintings inlaid with picture frames at regular intervals on the walls. At the same time, there were some wooden sculptures glued to the walls, which made the environment look elegant and stylish. In the center of the banquet hall, there were 3 light brown long tables. One table was placed horizontally, while the other 2 were placed vertically. In fact, there should have been many round tables around, but because there were not many people attending the banquet, they had been removed. At this moment, there were already drinks and fruits on the 3 long tables. Viscount Fergus, Madame de Milan, Gray, and the others sat at the long horizontal table. Viscount Fergus was in the middle, with Madame de Milan, Caroline, and Sarah on his left, and Bernal, Elise, and Gray on his right. The 2 barons and the 8 lords, including Linda, each had a baron sitting at the head of the table. Behind him sat 4 lords. The servants served the dishes. The chef's secret ham, grilled fish sprinkled with black pepper, stewed beef with rich gravy, steamed red prawns with their shells removed in the banquet hall. The atmosphere was very lively. Even Gray drank some red wine. In such an occasion, as the eldest son, Bernal was like a fish in water. From time to time, he would toast and greet the 2 barons and the 8 lords. "Uncle Gebert, tell us about the bandit extermination this time." The one he called Uncle Gardner was Baron Kipling, a middle-aged man with a burly build. He was drunk, and after being called Uncle by Bernal so affectionately, he immediately opened his mouth. The bandits this time are really cunning. After the robbery, they immediately moved. Their method of covering their tracks is very sophisticated. They also left many fake tracks to mislead us. We have been tracking them for 5 days, but we still haven't found any trace of them. Experienced? Could it be that there are veterans in this group of bandits? Bernal asked curiously. There are indeed veterans, and there are quite a few of them. Baron Ricardo, who had a little beard on his chin, added. Especially the leader of this group of bandits. It's actually the wanted criminal Marcellus. Marcellus, it's him. Everyone was shocked. Even Gray was no exception, because he had seen the wanted poster of this person. 3 months ago, when the original owner of this body had just arrived at the Fergus family, this wanted poster had just reached the Fergus family. So, in a sense, he had seen the wanted poster of this person. According to the wanted poster, this person had been on the battlefield between the kingdom and the Flame Kingdom, and had accumulated enough military merits to be in theft as a lord. Later, for some unknown reason, he assassinated the baron he was loyal to and disappeared without a trace. It turned out that he had joined the bandits and appeared in Viscount Fergus territory. According to the wanted poster, this person has the strength of an upper-level blood warrior. Is that true? Bernal asked. His strength is true. Baron Kipling nodded. In order to find this group of bandits, Lord Emerson, Gardner, and I split up into 3 groups to search for them. Gardner and I have both encountered this person before, but after exchanging blows with him, we all let him escape. His strength is indeed that of a high-ranking blood warrior. Later, could it be that Father killed him? Bernal looked at Viscount Fergus. After this person and this group of bandits were surrounded several times, they were ready to escape from the territory, but I intercepted them at Fallen Leaf Hill and killed them. Viscount Fergus nodded. The banquet lasted until the afternoon before it completely ended. The 2 drunken barons and the other lords were arranged to stay in the castle's guest rooms until the next day, when they returned to their respective territories. As nobles enfeoffed by Viscount Fergus, they all had their own territories and usually stayed in their respective territories. When Viscount Fergus called for them, they would rush over with the cavalry they had trained and respond to Viscount Fergus's call. Because he did not drink much red wine, Gray woke up early the next day. As usual, he went to the remote house in the south of the castle and prepared to cultivate in the open space near the house. Although his strength had been restored to that of a lower-level blood warrior, and there would be no problem even if he were to head to the gymnasium to train, Gray was already used to training in this place. Moreover, this place was indeed quiet and undisturbed, so he continued to train here. With a low growl, he began to cultivate the blood technique, Wind Wolf. His strength had reached that of a lower-level blood warrior, and his body had unconsciously carried a sense of sharpness, as if he had transformed into a real wind wolf. His whole person was completely immersed in cultivation. Once, twice. It was not until the first movement of the 3rd time that he stopped cultivating, panting heavily, after persisting for almost 6 minutes. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, drenching his black hair. Although his 16-year-old body looked a little thin, in fact, under his thin body were strong muscles that were comparable to or even stronger than the boxing champion in his previous life. "Young master, wipe your face." Seeing that he had finished cultivating, the maid Barbara came up at the right time and handed him a wet towel. Gray reached out to take it and wiped the sweat off his forehead. The towel, soaked in cold water, brought a comfortable coolness to his body that had just finished cultivating. Because his strength had been restored, there was no need to be secretive. Gray simply brought the maid, Barbara, along, but he still had her leave when he was cultivating. After coming to this world for more than a month, he had already fallen in love with this kind of life of being served by a maid. In particular, this maid was extremely beautiful. She was tall and slender, with fair skin and a pretty face. Just looking at her was pleasing to the eye. Although my cultivation progress is much slower than before I became a lower-level blood warrior, it's still extremely fast. Looks like my body's metamorphosis hasn't ended yet. In other words, my body's metamorphosis isn't because the body's original owner's blood power hasn't disappeared. Handing the towel back to Barbara, Gray's face showed that he was deep in thought. Today was the 4th day since he became a lower-level blood warrior. During these few days of cultivation, he could still feel the rapid improvement of his strength. Obviously, his body's metamorphosis wasn't because the body's original owner's blood power hadn't disappeared. As for his cultivation speed, compared to before he became a lower-level blood warrior, it was much slower. This was a normal phenomenon. The further a blood warrior's cultivation went, the slower the progress would be, especially at Viscount Fergus's level. If he didn't have the corresponding blood of blood fiends and the assistance of medicine, it would probably take years for him to improve. In fact, it wasn't just the cultivation of blood warriors. Wasn't it the same for other types of training? For example, in the 100-meter race in his previous life, progress was definitely the fastest at the beginning of training. Towards the end, especially after entering the 10-second barrier, even a 0.01 of improvement would take an unknown amount of time. Therefore, it was normal for his cultivation speed to be slower than before. His body's metamorphosis should still be in progress. The most convincing proof of this was that his current appetite hadn't decreased. Let's go back. Bringing Barbara with him, Gray returned to the main building of the castle. After taking a bath in the bathroom and changing into a clean set of clothes, Gray prepared to head to the library. At this moment, a man dressed in black and white servant attire bowed to him and spoke. Chapter 16. The Purple Jade Hall was a small hall with an area of about 100 square meters. It was usually used as a gathering place for the family's internal members. In the hall, there was a purple stone fireplace against the wall opposite the door. Because the temperature wasn't too cold, there was no firewood burning in the fireplace. The walls and floor of the room were also paved with purple stone. At the same time, there were many exquisite patterns carved on them. This was also the reason why this hall was called the Purple Jade Hall. Opposite the Purple Jade Hall was a Gold Jade Hall. It was much more spacious than the Purple Jade Hall. That was the hall that Viscount Fergus usually used to receive visitors. In the center of the Purple Jade Hall, there was a purple wood circular long table. Surrounding the long table were several armchair chairs. At this moment, most of these armchair chairs were already occupied. Viscount Fergus, Bernal, Elise, Caroline, and Sarah. Father. Gray walked over and greeted Viscount Fergus, who was wearing brown home clothes, rather stiffly. He was rather conflicted about calling a stranger father, but he had to lower his head when he was under someone else's roof. Unless he wanted to leave the Fergus family, which he obviously couldn't do now. You're here. Have a seat. Viscount Fergus nodded and indicated for Gray to find a seat. Gray looked at the empty seat and immediately saw a young girl with long black hair and blue eyes. She heaved a sigh of relief and looked at him with a joyful expression. It was this body's younger sister, Sarah, who shared the same father and mother. It was obvious that she wasn't used to this kind of atmosphere. Therefore, when she saw Gray's arrival, it was as if she had seen her pillar of support. Gray walked over and patted her head, indicating that she didn't need to be nervous. He then sat beside her. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Viscount Fergus's gaze swept across everyone's faces and opened his mouth. I just came back yesterday and didn't have time to ask about your cultivation. Bernal, you didn't fall behind in your cultivation during this period, did you? Though all of you in this sentence referred to Gray and the others other than Sarah. Sarah was still a few months away from 14 years old, and the best age to practice blood techniques was 15 years old. Therefore, she had yet to receive a blood implant to practice blood techniques. Father, while you were away, we didn't relax at all. We completed our daily training on time. Bernal replied. That's good. Viscount Fergus nodded, paused for a moment, and looked at Elise. Is there any progress in your cultivation? Elise, how long can you last in the first posture of the third blood technique cultivation? In this world, the units used to measure time were still minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years. The length was slightly different from Gray's previous world, but not by much. 3 minutes. Elise shrank her head and said in a low voice, You have to work harder. Viscount Fergus frowned slightly. There was a trace of disappointment in his eyes, and his voice was slightly dissatisfied. Elise became a lower-level blood warrior in January of this year. It had been almost half a year since then, but her progress was only in the third blood technique cultivation. He was very disappointed that she could only last in the first posture for 3 minutes. Then he looked at Bernal and asked, What are you doing? Bernal, what about you? I can already complete the first posture of the fourth blood technique cultivation. Bernal replied respectfully. If one could cultivate the blood technique twice in a row, their strength would be equivalent to that of a low-level blood warrior. If one could cultivate it 3 times in a row, they would be equivalent to a middle-level blood warrior. Above that, the number of times one could cultivate the blood technique in a row would increase accordingly. This was the conclusion that the people of this continent had made during their cultivation. It was used to judge their current cultivation progress. Of course, different people had different blood techniques. There were differences in this standard, but most people's blood techniques were the same. Not bad. Viscount Fergus nodded. Bernal was just over 22 years old this year. His cultivation progress was similar to when he was young. If there were no accidents, Bernal should reach the realm of a ferocious blood warrior around 35 years old. He would have no problem inheriting the family business, but it would probably be difficult for him to advance further. He then asked about Caroline's cultivation progress and gave a vague, not bad evaluation. Obviously, he did not value the cultivation progress of Caroline, who was going to be married off in the future. Finally, he looked at Gray and asked, "Gray, how's your cultivation progress now? I can last in the first posture of the third blood technique cultivation for about 6 minutes." Gray did not hide anything. With his current strength, there was no need to hide it at all. If he revealed it, he would be more valued by Viscount Fergus and increase his bargaining chip. After all, there was still a mastermind behind the scenes who wanted to kill him. He needed Viscount Fergus's attention and protection. "You can already last for 6 minutes? Good, very good." Hearing Gray's answer, Viscount Fergus's face finally blossomed into a smile. He slapped the armrest, his face full of smiles. It had only been 3.5 months since Gray had become a lower-level blood warrior, but he could already last for 6 minutes in the first posture of the third blood technique cultivation. According to his estimation, with this cultivation progress, Gray should be able to become a middle-level blood warrior in 2 years, or even less. This cultivation speed could be said to be extremely fast, far surpassing his own in the past. That was why he was so happy. The others in the room also looked at Gray with different expressions. Lisa was happy from the bottom of her heart. After all, she and Gray were now bound together for good or ill. Moreover, she was very dependent on her brother, Gray. Naturally, she hoped that Gray would be as strong as possible. Caroline was purely surprised by Gray's talent. Gray's achievements had nothing to do with her, but the talent that Gray had displayed had indeed surprised her. Bernal was deeply afraid. The talent that Gray had displayed was too great a threat to his position in the family. Elise's jealousy was tinged with suspicion. She was jealous of Gray's talent, but she also suspected that Gray had made a false report. After all, according to her previous observations, there was a problem with Gray's body. With Gray's cultivation talent, it might even be possible for him to become a berserker in the future. Bernal had already restrained his feelings of jealousy, or at least it couldn't be seen on his face. He spoke with a voice filled with envy and happiness for Gray. "It is indeed possible." The smile on Viscount Fergus's face didn't fade for a long time. Berserker was a rank above ferocious blood warriors. It was also a rank that he greatly desired to reach. Their strength was far stronger than ferocious blood warriors. Under normal circumstances, a single berserker could take on 5 ferocious blood warriors like him. It could be said that they were terrifyingly strong. Unfortunately, at his current age, his body had already begun to regress from his prime to his old age. If he didn't have a special opportunity, he would probably be stuck as a ferocious blood warrior for the rest of his life. This was also a regret in his heart. Now that he saw that Gray really did have this kind of talent, he was gratified and couldn't help but confirm his previous thoughts. Compared to ferocious blood warriors, the benefits of berserkers weren't just reflected in their fighting strength. Continue to work hard. Don't slack off. Don't waste your talent. Thinking about it, Viscount Fergus was afraid that Gray would become arrogant because of this, so he added another sentence. "I will, father." Gray replied. After discussing matters of cultivation, they began to chat. Interesting stories and anecdotes that they had read or heard from books were all included in the content of their chat. Compared to the beginning, the atmosphere was much more lively. "Father, I heard that the Sydney Marquis family has a copperback dragon whose strength is comparable to ferocious blood warriors. Is this true?" Gray couldn't help but take the opportunity to ask the curiosity in his heart. The Sydney Marquis family was a legendary family. Unlike other families, the Sydney Marquis family did not grow up step by step through the ranks of lords, barons, and viscounts. Instead, the Sydney Marquis family was directly bestowed the title of Marquis. This family was also the family that governed the Fergus family. The Fergus family was in theft by this family, and the wanted order mentioned yesterday was issued by this family. There were many rumors about this family's legendary pioneering history. The most popular rumor was that the first generation of the Sydney family had a copperback dragon as a mount. It was with this copperback dragon comparable to ferocious blood warriors that the Marquis family became the current Marquis family in one fell swoop. In the 300 years since they became the Marquis family, no trace of this copperback dragon had appeared in the Marquis family. However, it was generally believed that this copperback dragon didn't die of old age. Dragons were blood beasts that had a direct bloodline relationship with the legendary dragon. Their lifespan was generally extremely long. For example, the copperback dragon had a lifespan of 1,000 years, which was far beyond the reach of humans. This copperback dragon does exist. As a direct noble of the Sidney family, Viscount Fergus had obviously dealt with the Sidney family many times. He said with certainty, "It really exists." Caroline lightly covered her red lips, a rare look of surprise on her face. The reason why Gray asked about the copperback dragon was because he had seen a book related to the Sidney family on the miscellaneous bookshelf in the library. Caroline had obviously also read this book. "I've seen it once in the Sidney family. It was covered in brass scales and emitted an extremely terrifying aura." Viscount Fergus's eyes revealed a look of reminiscence. Obviously, that encounter with the copperback dragon must have left an extremely deep impression on him. After that, they discussed some interesting matters. It was close to noon, and a servant had already come to inform them that lunch was ready. At this moment, Elise stood up and spoke to Viscount Fergus. Chapter 17. Nonsense. Don't think that I don't know what you did a few days ago. Although Gray stole your blood beast blood, it was because you stole his blood beast blood in the first place. Viscount Fergus's face showed anger as he berated, his body exuding the majesty of an angry lion. A servant had already reported to him about the conflict between Elise and Gray a few days ago. From Elise stealing Gray's blood, to Lord Gray asking Lord Linda to stand up for him, to Gray snatching back the blood and snatching Elise's blood as well, and finally, to Gray admitting defeat to Madame de Milan and giving up next month's portion of the blood. He had told him all the details. As the master of the castle and the head of the Fergus family, he was the one with the highest authority over the castle and the family. Nothing in the family could be hidden from him. He felt that the final punishment was fair, so he didn't have any intention of asking further. He hadn't thought that Elise would still be brooding and actually want to fight Gray. Faced with Viscount Fergus's angry rebuke, Elise was so scared that her body trembled. However, she bit her lips tightly and stubbornly spoke. "Father, the matter a few days ago was indeed my fault. However, I'm requesting to fight Gray now, not because of the matter a few days ago, but to temper my battle skills. After all, Gray's strength is extremely close to mine." "Temper your battle skills?" Viscount Fergus raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard Elise's reason. He naturally wouldn't believe Elise's reasons so easily, but he couldn't help but have other considerations when it came to tempering his battle skills. If a blood warrior's level represented their battle strength, then battle skills were the way to bring out their battle strength. The talent that Gray had displayed already made him want to train Gray's battle skills as soon as possible. "Father, battle skills can only be better tempered in actual combat. Besides, with you here, nothing will happen to the two of them. Why don't you agree to Elise's battle?" Bornel's eyes moved slightly as he tried to persuade his father. "Gray, what do you think?" Viscount Fergus looked at Gray and asked. "Father, I also want a chance to temper my battle skills," Gray said with a calm expression. Ever since he had taken over this body, AI Lizzie had been causing trouble for him. Especially a few days ago, AI Lizzie even had designs on a share of Blood Fiend's blood. It could be said that AI Lizzie had completely exceeded the limits of his tolerance. He had long had the idea of resolving his conflict with Elise. Now that Elise had taken the initiative to bring it up, he naturally had no reason to refuse. As for whether he was a match for her, that would only be known after the battle. The difference in strength between the two wasn't that great, so he had no reason to be afraid. "Very well, I agree to this battle. The time will be set for this afternoon." Viscount Fergus immediately nodded and said, In the afternoon, the sun that wasn't too hot hung in the sky, sprinkling down warm rays of light. On the training ground of the castle, paved with white stones, Gray and Elise stood facing each other. Gray was wearing a light gray battle suit, and his face was delicate and pretty. Elise was wearing a white battle suit with a handsome face. However, there was a hint of gloominess in her eyes at this moment. Not far from the two, Viscount Fergus, who was still wearing the brown casual clothes from this morning, stood with his hands behind his back. Further away from the two stood Sarah, Caroline, and Bernal. Apart from them, there was also Madame de Milan and the commander of the castle guards, Lord Linda. The battle between the two had obviously attracted the attention of these two. "Let's begin." Viscount Fergus opened his mouth and said. He didn't say that he couldn't kill or anything like that. With him watching, if something happened to the two of them, then he wouldn't live up to his name as a ferocious blood warrior. Yes, yes. Gray and Elise both responded and looked at each other. A hint of coldness flashed across their eyes. At this point, whether it was to sharpen their battle experience or simply to resolve their grudges was no longer important. Pa, pa, pa. Elise took the lead and pounced towards Gray. Her long boots stepped on the white stone floor of the training ground and made a hurried sound. His entire figure pounced forward at high speed, covering a distance of more than 10 meters in an extremely short period of time. He was like a wind wolf pouncing on its prey. His right hand bent into a claw and clawed at Gray's chest, producing a whoosh sound. Pa! Gray moved a step to the side and dodged Elise's claw. At the same time, his right hand quickly formed a claw and grabbed towards Elise. Her right hand grabbed empty air and a hand came from the side. Elise's left hand quickly shot out and also formed a claw to meet the hand coming toward her. Bang! The two claws collided in midair and made a muffled sound. For faint red marks could be seen on the palms of the two people's hands that had collided. In that instant, the 4 fingers of the two other than their thumbs had all pierced into each other's palms and left light marks on each other's palms. They were evenly matched. Neither of them had the upper hand in their first exchange. From their reaction speed to the power of their attacks, the two's battle strength should be about the same. This was expected. One of them could last for 3 minutes in the first position for the third time, while the other could last for 6 minutes. This kind of difference was almost negligible. Moreover, both of them cultivated the same blood technique, so in terms of battle strength, they were about the same. Whoosh! Pain came from their palms, and both of them retracted their hands reflexively. However, in the next moment, the other hand had already shot out and collided once again. Bang! 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 Their hands continued to extend and retract, colliding with each other in midair. After more than 10 exchanges, many red dots appeared on both of their palms. Suddenly, as if he was enlightened, Gray's extended right hand moved to the side and brushed past Elise's extended hand. Then, he leaned forward and knocked Elise's hand aside. After knocking Elise's hand aside, Gray's hand did not stop there. Suddenly, he extended his hand and ruthlessly hammered Elise's stomach with his claw. Boom! Even with the protection of the battle armor, under Gray's claw, Elise could not help but bend her body and fly backwards. Could this be the battle talent of the original owner of this body? Looking at Elise, who was sent flying by his punch, and then looking at his own hand, a strange look flashed across Gray's eyes. In his previous life, as an ordinary office worker, Gray naturally did not come into contact with combat skills. Moreover, he had 0 fighting experience, so, in terms of battle experience, he and Elise, who had lived 2 lives, could be said to be about the same. However, in the battle just now, the scene of the original owner of this body single-handedly fighting 5 soldiers surfaced in his mind, as well as unclear thoughts such as, what should I do now? He could not help but suspect the cause of this unforeseen event to be the original owner of this body. The original owner of this body was a genius, not only in terms of cultivation, but also in terms of battle. When he became a low-level blood warrior for the first time, he was already able to single-handedly fight 5 well-trained soldiers. Of course, this had to do with his superior low-level blood warrior physique, but it also had to do with his battle talent. Under normal circumstances, only a low-level blood warrior with rich battle experience will be able to single-handedly fight 5 well-trained soldiers. However, the original owner of this body had just become a low-level blood warrior and did not have any battle experience, but he had done it. This was all because the other party had extremely high battle talent. Originally, Gray had thought that the other party's battle talent would have completely disappeared with the disappearance of his soul. Now, It seemed that the other party had used some strange method to merge with his soul. What he had obtained was not only the other party's memories, but also the other party's battle talent. There might even be more, but he had not discovered it yet. Bam! After flying for more than 10 meters, Elise pathetically landed on the ground and crawled up. The pain from her abdomen caused her expression to change slightly. Fortunately, she had the defense of the combat armor, which weakened some of the force. Otherwise, it would have been much more painful. Humph! Elise's expression turned ugly as she was actually at a disadvantage in the fight. She fiercely stomped on the ground and once again pounced at Gray. Her left and right hand struck out together, one from the left and one from the right, at the same time forming claws to attack Gray. It was as if the upper and lower jaws of a wind wolf were rapidly closing, and the left and right fingers were the sharp teeth of the wind wolf. Whoosh, whoosh. Gray also struck out with his left and right hands in the shape of claws, but unlike Elise's way of crushing the middle, he split them apart from the middle. Bam, bam. The two people's hands collided with each other, and two sounds of collision rang out almost at the same time. Then, they quickly separated again, and once again gathered strength to attack the other party. Bam, bam, bam. Both of their hands moved quickly, and more than 10 hurried collisions rang out in succession. When they were about to collide again, Gray's hands suddenly slipped nimbly, crisscrossing past each other and actually grabbing Elise's wrists. Then he pushed Elise's hands to the side, leaned forward, and quickly closed in on Elise. His right shoulder tilted, and his shoulder was like a giant hammer, fiercely hammering Elise's chest. Boom! Chapter 18. Good. Seeing Gray send Elise flying again, Viscount Fergus's eyes lit up. 3 months ago, when he brought Gray to the castle, he had arranged for 5 well-trained soldiers to fight with Gray. In the end, the victor was Gray. At that time, he felt that Gray's talent in battle was not bad. Now, seeing Gray send Alice, who was on par with him, flying twice in a row, he couldn't help but be even more certain of his previous guess. Gray did indeed have an extremely high talent for battle. Not only did he have a strong talent in cultivation, but he also had a very high talent in battle. He was very optimistic about Gray's future. Brother. The joy on Sarah's face could not be concealed. Since the beginning of the battle, her hands had been nervously moving in front of her. Now that she saw Gray clearly had the advantage, she immediately let out a sigh of relief. I didn't expect young Master Gray's talent in battle to be so strong. Lord Lynn's eyes were filled with surprise. Gray's talent in cultivation had already surprised him. He did not expect Gray's talent in battle to be so extraordinary as well. In his heart, he felt that his previous decision was right. Madame de Milan frowned slightly. Born in a baron's family, she did not have the opportunity to cultivate. However, from Elise's 2 defeats, she could see that the one who had the advantage was Gray. Bang! Landing on the ground, she felt a burning pain in her chest. At the same time, she felt her chest tighten. After a while, Elise crawled up from the ground. If not for the protection of his armor, he would have been injured. Thinking of this, his expression could not help but change. How can this guy be so much stronger than me? A cold light flashed in his eyes. In the next moment, a trace of blood energy flowed out from his heart and seeped into his legs. Whoosh! His figure quickly flashed out, moving faster than before. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of Gray. Chi! A trace of blood energy also seeped into his right hand, causing the skin on his right hand to harden and increase his strength. His entire right hand was as hard as a metal claw, quickly grabbing at Gray. Whoosh! Just as Elise's metal claw was about to grab Gray, Gray moved. His speed also increased at a terrifying speed. In nick of time, he dodged Elise's fierce claw. He had also used blood energy to increase his speed. When he stopped again, he appeared on Elise's left side. His right hand formed a claw like an angry dragon and viciously grabbed Elise's chest. 4 clear claw marks were left on the chest of his opponent's white armor. Boom! Ellis flew back as if he had been hit by a heavy hammer. This time, he flew back more than 20 meters. After falling to the ground, she couldn't get up for a while. She clutched her chest and struggled to get up several times, but failed. Gray's claw had also used blood energy. Although Elise wasn't seriously injured due to the armor's protection, Elise was in so much pain that she couldn't get up for a while. Seeing Elise unable to get up for a long time, Madame de Milan cried out in alarm and ran towards Elise. "How are you? Are you hurt?" After helping Elise sit up, Madame de Milan looked at Elise's pained face with worry. She then turned to Gray and angrily reprimanded him. "Gray, how could you be so heavy-handed? Do you want to kill?" Gray didn't reply because there was no need to. Although he wanted to be heavy-handed, he didn't have the chance with Viscount Fergus present. "All right," Gray has already held back. Sure enough, Viscount Fergus interrupted Madame de Milan. As a ferocious warrior, he could naturally see that Gray hadn't been heavy-handed, so he directly interrupted Madame de Milan's reprimand. A moment later, everyone dispersed from the training ground with different expressions. Today's battle had allowed them to see and think of many things. In short, some people were happy while others were sad. For example, Sarah was happy. Her brother from the same father and mother was so strong, so she naturally felt a deep sense of pride. For example, Linda. Gray not only possessed powerful cultivation talent, but also outstanding fighting talent. He would definitely be valued by the Viscount in the future. His investment was clearly the right one. For example, Madame de Milan was worried. Gray, this illegitimate son, had displayed such talent and would definitely be valued by the Viscount. With him around, her prestige in the family would probably be severely affected. For example, Bernal. The talent Gray displayed was already a serious threat to his position as the eldest son. Moreover, with Gray's cultivation talent, it was only a matter of time before he surpassed him. This made him feel deeply threatened. On the way back, Elise's face was gloomy. He hadn't suffered any serious injuries. Apart from a slight bruise on his chest, there were only a few shallow scratches on his hands. But at this moment, his heart was filled with anger, shock, and jealousy. He was angry that he had lost to Gray and shocked that there was no problem with Gray's body. He had originally wanted to expose the problem with Gray's body through the battle, but it was obvious that there was no problem with Gray's body. Gray was also able to use the power of blood. It was obvious that his strength was a genuine lower blood warrior, and there were no problems as expected. He was jealous of the other's cultivation talent. He had only cultivated for a little more than a year, but he could already defeat him, who had cultivated for a full 3 years. This made him very jealous. Why would such talent appear in that illegitimate son? Why didn't he have such talent? "Young Master Elise, Madame asked me to deliver this to you." A servant whose right hand was fixed by a wooden board and wrapped in bandages ran over with small steps. He held a box of ointment in his hand. It was the freckled servant Neeson, whose right hand had been broken by Gray. Scram! Seeing the fawning expression on the servant's face, Elise felt an inexplicable sense of disgust. She kicked the servant to the ground and walked straight past him without even looking at him. After letting the maid, Barbara, apply some ointment to his palms and bandaging them with gauze, Gray headed to the south of the castle, where he usually cultivated. Because of the battle with Elise, his afternoon cultivation had been put on hold. However, he did not intend to give up on his afternoon cultivation and immediately rushed over after the battle. Other than the maid Barbara, Sarah also came with him. She was wearing a light blue long dress. Her long black hair draped behind her head and down to her shoulders. Her skin was fair, and although she was not old, she was already showing signs of being a beauty. When she was a few years older, her beauty would not be any less than Caroline's. "Brother, why aren't you cultivating in the training field?" Sarah asked curiously as she looked at the empty space where Gray usually cultivated. "It's quieter here. I won't be disturbed," Gray explained. Before his strength recovered to that of a lower blood warrior, he did not want anyone to disturb him or discover that he did not have the strength of a lower blood warrior. After his strength recovered to that of a lower blood warrior, he also did not want anyone to disturb him. This was because his daily cultivation progress was increasing too quickly compared to others. Even his maid, Barbara, had to wait for him in the distance. He would only summon her after he was done with his cultivation. "Oh," Sarah responded with a sudden realization and then giggled. Brother, you were really amazing today. You actually defeated Elise. Elise's sour face when she left was simply hilarious. Usually, when she was with Gray in private, Sarah addressed the three brothers and sisters born by Madame de Milan by their names. It was obvious that she did not approve of them in her heart. It's all right. Gray smiled. Before the battle, he did not expect to win so easily. The only reason he agreed to the battle was because their strength was on par, and there was no reason for him to be afraid of the other party. Thinking of this, he could not help but think of the strange thoughts that had appeared in his mind during the battle earlier. Obviously, that should be a manifestation of the body's original owner's combat talent. In other words, he had obtained the body's original owner's combat talent through some inexplicable method. While this made him happy, he could not help but feel a trace of worry. Inexplicably possessing an extremely strong combat talent indeed made him happy, but the problems that arose from it made him rather worried. Had the soul of the body's original owner disappeared? If it had disappeared, how had it disappeared? Chapter 19. After watching the battle between Gray and Elise, Bernal wanted to stay and train in the afternoon. Unlike Elise, he was very serious about training. Unless there were special circumstances, he would train in the morning and afternoon. But after standing in the training field for a while, he just couldn't calm down. He couldn't immerse himself in training. His mind kept replaying the scene of Gray defeating Elise. Elise had already been surpassed by Gray. What about him? With his training talent, surpassing him was certain. In 3 years, maybe 2 years, he would surpass him. He felt a deep pressure, as well as a trace of helplessness and unwillingness. Lord Lind could guess the reason why Viscount Fergus had brought Gray into the castle for training. How could he not have guessed it? This was also the reason why he had been hostile towards Gray ever since Gray was brought to the castle. Although Viscount Fergus did the right thing in terms of the family's development and was beneficial to the family's interests, his personal interests would be harmed. In his heart, he didn't want to. Thinking of this, he couldn't calm down no matter how hard he tried. In the end, he left the training field and sat in a carriage with the Fergus family's Wind Wolf emblem. He left the castle and went to Fergus City next to the castle. Today, there was a party in Fergus City organized by Baron Ricardo's eldest son, Ian Ricardo. Of course, he was invited, but he refused. But now, he couldn't calm down no matter what, so he decided to go to the party and relax. After finishing his afternoon training, he bid farewell to Sarah, who was preparing to go to etiquette class. Gray took a bath and went to the library as usual. In the library, Caroline was already sitting at the round table, quietly reading. She was wearing a long dress with wide sleeves and a row of golden ribbons tied in front of her chest. Her brown hair was slightly curled, elegant and not lacking in elegance. After greeting the other party, Gray headed to the third row where the miscellaneous books were stacked. He started to look for books that interested him. He quickly locked onto his target. It was a book with a light brown leather cover. On it was written Aristocratic Territories. Taking the book out, Gray hugged it and went to the round table. He pulled out a chair and sat down. The maid, Barbara, poured a cup of milk tea and a plate of crispy biscuits. He took a sip of the milk tea and flipped open a book to read. Aristocrats are divided into territories. Aristocratic status is only valid within the territory of the upper nobles. Outside the territory of the upper nobles will not be recognized. The records in the book was a tongue twister. Gray read as he tried to understand it. He roughly understood it. The main point was that aristocratic status was not universal across the entire kingdom. It was only valid within a certain area. Take the Fergus family, for example. The Fergus family was infested by the Sydney Marquis family. The Sydney Marquis family was located in the south of the kingdom and had a territory of about 400,000 square kilometers. The area was almost equivalent to a province in Gray's previous life. Because the Fergus family was infested by the Sydney Marquis family, the Fergus family's aristocratic status was only valid within the 400,000 square kilometers of the Sydney Marquis family's territory in the south of the kingdom. If they left this area and entered the territory of other families, the Fergus family's aristocratic status would not be recognized. This system was similar to the tiered loyalty system of the Middle Ages in Europe in Gray's previous life. However, there were some differences. The biggest difference was that aristocratic status was limited by territory. The Sidney Marquis family was infected by the Fergus family. The Fergus family was loyal to the Sidney family. The Sidney Marquis family guaranteed the Fergus family's aristocratic status and rights within their own territory. The Fergus family was loyal to the Sidney family and not to the kingdom. It could only be said that the Sidney family was loyal to the kingdom, not the Fergus family. Under this system, the Sidney family and other aristocrats infected by the kingdom are like the feudal lords in my previous life. Apart from paying taxes on time every year, everything in their territory is up to them. They have a lot of autonomy. However, the rights of ordinary aristocrats are greatly restricted. Aristocrats have special privileges in terms of food, building materials, and so on. The aristocratic territorial system obviously reduces the scope of these privileges. Gray frowned as he thought to himself. I'm afraid that it's not only the rights that are restricted, but also the space for advancement. The number of titles that each aristocrat could infect was limited. As a Viscount family, the Fergus family could only infect 3 barons and 10 lords. Once the number of barons and lords was filled, even if someone or a family had made a great contribution to the territory, they would not be infected. Although there was an assessment standard for each successor, and if 3 successive successors failed to meet the assessment standard, they would be demoted or stripped of their title. However, it still couldn't fundamentally solve the problem of not having enough titles to confer. Fergus City was the largest city within the Viscount Fergus's territory. It had a population of 30,000. From the fact that this city was named after Fergus, one could see the relationship between this city and the Fergus family. That's right, this city was directly under the Fergus family's control. Riding in a carriage, Bernal arrived at an elegantly decorated place in the city called the Zither Music Hall. He was then led to the second floor of the Zither Music Hall. The Zither Music Hall was one of the properties of Baron Ricardo's family. It was famous for its food and music. Professional pianists were stationed in the restaurant to deliver beautiful piano music to the guests. The entire second floor was used as a banquet hall. There were dozens of young men and women in the banquet hall. The man was wearing a double-breasted tuxedo that extended to his hips, accentuating his mature temperament. The woman was wearing a colorful round-necked lace dress with a corset around her waist, revealing her beautiful figure without a doubt. A few people had different family emblems embroidered on their sleeves. These people became the center of the banquet because family emblems were the symbols of aristocratic families. In other words, they came from aristocratic families. The arrival of the Viscount's eldest son, Bernal, naturally became the center of the banquet. He even overshadowed the previous nobles. However, these nobles didn't complain at all. Instead, they deliberately tried to curry favor with Bernal. Bernal clinked glasses with these people and greeted them with a forced smile on his face. Several good-looking women invited him to dance, but he politely declined. Young Master Bernal seems to be in a bad mood. A young man with light brown hair walked over with a glass of red wine in his hand. He wasn't very tall, only about 1.7 meters. He was the organizer of the banquet, the eldest son of Ricardo's family, Ian. You can tell. Hearing the words of the young man with light brown hair, Bernal raised his glass and clinked glasses with the other party. He drank the red wine in the glass in one gulp. You're different from usual. Ian nodded and said. He deliberately made friends with Bernal, and his relationship with Bernal was very good. He also understood Bernal quite well. Did something happen? My father brought his illegitimate son into the castle. You should have heard about it, right? Bernal sighed and said, I heard from my father that he has a very high talent for cultivation. Ian nodded. Not only did he hear about the Viscount's illegitimate son from his father, but he also heard some of his father's shocking speculations. It's not just a little high. Just today, Elise was defeated by him. I estimate that in at most 3 years, I may be surpassed by him. A bitter smile appeared on Bernal's face. His talent, is that terrifying? Ian was surprised. Bernal was now a middle-level blood warrior. In addition, Bernal would definitely continue to improve. If he surpassed Bernal in 3 years, wouldn't that mean that he could advance from a low-level blood warrior to a middle-level blood warrior in 2 years? Not only is his talent for cultivation strong, even his battle talent is terrifying. Bernal recalled the battle between Gray and Elise today, and the bitterness on his face became even more apparent. He seemed to be a little drunk, and as if he wanted to vent his depressed emotions, he opened his mouth and spoke of the worries and uneasiness that had been pressing on his chest. "My father is probably thinking of—" The last few words were said very softly. Only Ian, who was closest to him, could hear it. "What? Lord Viscount really plans to?" Ian's face was full of shock, and he looked at Bernal in disbelief. Although Fergus had already guessed this in his territory, when he really heard it from a member of the Fergus family, he still couldn't help but be shocked. "This is only my guess, but the possibility is very high." Bernal waved at a servant passing by and took a glass of red wine from the servant's tray. He once again drank it in one gulp. His mouth was full of bitterness, and he didn't taste the sweetness of the red wine at all. "How can that be? It shouldn't be. Even if your talent is not as good as his, the Viscount shouldn't have chosen an illegitimate son, right?" After a while, Ian came back to his senses and said doubtfully, "It is indeed impossible under normal circumstances, but what if this illegitimate son has the potential to become a berserker?" Bernal said helplessly. "The potential to become a berserker?" Ian was startled. Berserker? That was a berserker. If that illegitimate son of the Viscount really had the potential to become a berserker, then the Viscount was very likely to do so. Chapter 20. After the conversation, both of them fell into silence. Ian did not know what to say at a time like this, while Bernal downed glass after glass of red wine. In the end, Bernal drank until his head was heavy and his feet were light. Even with the strong physique of a middle-level blood warrior, he could not withstand the alcohol. He walked out of the banquet hall and went to the washroom on the first floor to ease the effects of the alcohol. Who is it? Suddenly, he noticed someone approaching from behind and quickly turned around. Even in his drunken state, he still noticed it at the first moment. When he turned around, he saw a man in a cloak with his head buried in a hood, revealing only the lower half of his face. "Young Master Bernal, don't be nervous. I have no ill intentions. I'm here to help you," the man said in a low voice. "Help me?" In his drunkenness, Bernal chuckled. "What can you help me with?" He obviously did not believe that the man could help him. "For example, I can help you kill that genius brother of yours," the cloaked man said with a smile. Whoosh! Bernal seemed to have been splashed with a bucket of cold water. He instantly sobered up and looked at the cloaked man in disbelief. A month ago, Gray was assassinated in Fergus City and was seriously injured and almost died. Within the Viscount's territory, there were many rumors. Among them, there were rumors that he was the instigator. Even Viscount Fergus summoned him for questioning. But in reality, this matter had nothing to do with him. Although he was unhappy that his position was threatened, it was not to the extent that he would send someone to assassinate him. After all, the other party was his father's son and was related to him by blood. After that assassination, Viscount Fergus did his best to clean up the rats in his territory. However, he didn't gain much. The mastermind seemed to have disappeared as well. He didn't expect the mastermind to appear again after a month and even find him. "Young Master Bernal, I'm sure you can guess Viscount Fergus's plan. Are you really willing to let your title be taken away by an illegitimate son?" The cloaked man laughed sinisterly. Bernal was startled, and his expression suddenly became uncertain. If he was willing to let his title be taken away by a bastard, he would not be so upset today and would not have drunk so much wine. In the Purple Moon Kingdom, the title of nobility was usually inherited by the eldest son. Illegitimate children had no right of inheritance, but there were exceptions. If a noble applied for a title from a noble family and obtained permission, an illegitimate child could also inherit the title. In the history of the Purple Moon Kingdom, there have been cases of illegitimate children inheriting the title of nobility. The most famous case was the Turut family, one of the 7 great Marquis family. The current main family of the Turut family was inherited by an illegitimate child, and now His father had plans to pass the title to his illegitimate son. Which force do you represent? Taking a deep breath, Bernal forced himself to calm down and asked, Young Master Bernal, you don't need to know. Young Master Bernal, you only need to know that we can help you get rid of this illegitimate son. Of course, this will require your cooperation. After all, he has been staying in the castle and not coming out. Even if we want to assassinate him, it will be very difficult. The cloaked man's words were like the whispers of a devil in Bernal's ears. It caused an endless thought to emerge in his mind. Yes, as long as that guy is dead, the title of nobility will belong to me again. Whether it's Elise or Caroline, they won't have the ability to fight for the title with me. The next day, the weather was clear, and the sun was not too hot. The Purple Moon Kingdom was located in the north of the continent, and the temperature was lower all year round. Even during the hottest summer of the year, the temperature would not be too high. In the Whitestone training ground of Viscount Fergus Castle, two people were fighting. One of them was a young man wearing a gray battle suit. He had a head of black hair, but his eyes were deep blue. This person was gray. The other person was wearing a purplish-black home clothes. He was over 8 meters tall, and his face looked like it was carved by a knife. Standing in the training ground, he unconsciously exuded a strong aura. This person was Viscount Fergus. Whoosh! Stomping his feet on the ground, Gray bent his body slightly and shot out like a sharp arrow. He stretched out his right hand, his 5 fingers forming a claw, and fiercely clawed at Viscount Fergus' chest. Ha! Viscount Fergus stood still. Just as Gray's right hand was about to touch him, his right hand moved. He gently patted out, accurately hitting Gray's right wrist and blocking Gray's claw. As for Gray, his right hand was blocked, and his left hand shot out in front of him, attacking Viscount Fergus again. In the end, it was still blocked by Viscount Fergus, and he still used his right hand. His left hand was behind his back, and he did not intend to use it at all. Pa! 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 The two quickly exchanged dozens of blows. Gray's 2 hands attacked intensively, but they were still blocked by Viscount Fergus with 1 hand. He did not even move half a step. You must attack quickly, accurately, and ruthlessly. Once you attack, do not hesitate. You must aim at the enemy's neck, eyes, and other weak points. While blocking Gray's attacks, Viscount Fergus still had the spare energy to instruct Gray's attacks. It was not a battle at all. Whether it was in terms of experience or strength, it was the same. In the end, Viscount Fergus was the main attacker, and Gray could only passively defend. Pung! Viscount Fergus's right hand passed through the protection of Gray's 2 hands and gently patted Gray's body. Gray felt his body stagger and was pushed back. He finally stopped after taking a few steps back. Huff! Huff! Gray panted violently, and sweat kept flowing from his forehead. The battle had only lasted for a little over 10 minutes, but it was as if he had continuously practiced the blood technique several times. You should rest first, Viscount Fergus said, seeing Gray like this. Yes, father. Gray responded and walked to the pavilion next to him. The maid, Barbara, had already come forward and handed him a towel. Elise, it's your turn. Viscount Fergus had no intention of leaving the training ground. Instead, he looked at the pavilion. Bernal, Caroline, and Elise were there. They had been watching the battle between Gray and Viscount Fox since the beginning. More accurately, they were instructing. Elise's challenge yesterday gave Viscount Fergus the idea of teaching the 4 of them battle techniques. So he gathered the 4 of them again today. Sarah had not been called because she had not yet implanted a bloodline to practice the blood technique. Instead, she was learning etiquette in the castle. Not only her, but Gray was also learning etiquette. Before coming to the castle, they had not received formal etiquette instruction, so they had to learn etiquette from the beginning. As a man, Gray's lessons were much simpler than Sarah's. There were only simple lessons such as noble dancing and daily etiquette. Therefore, it was much easier for him than for Sarah. He would only learn etiquette on Saturday and Sunday. After Gray, Elise, Caroline, and Bernal went up one after another and received guidance from Viscount Fergus. Gray drank fruit juice with ice as he observed the battle between the 3 of them and Viscount Fergus. Ice was stored in the castle's ice cellar during winter. Based on Gray's observation, the one with the best performance was Bernal. His opponent's battle techniques were very skillful. Every attack was very threatening. Gray estimated that he was not his opponent now. It was not only because of the difference in strength, but also because of the difference in battle techniques. He was able to defeat Elise yesterday because Elise also had no battle experience. Obviously, Bernal should have battle experience. Gray even felt that Bernal might already have experience in killing people. With the threat of the Blood Fiends and the other three kingdoms, even the nobles could not guarantee that they would not have to fight in their lifetime. Therefore, the nobles of this world paid great attention to the training of their children, especially in the area of battle. Some special noble families would give their children a baptism at the age of 18. They would even fight with prisoners on death row and use the prisoners' lives to complete the baptism. Next was Caroline. Although it was the same as Gray and Elise's first battle, her grasp of timing and the threat of her attacks were obviously stronger than Elise's. It could be seen that she had some talent in battle. After the 4 battles, Viscount Fergus came to the pavilion. The servant served him iced ale. He took a sip and looked at Bernal. Compared to a year ago, your battle techniques have improved greatly. It seems that in this year, not only did you not slack off in your training, you also often found opportunities to hone your battle techniques. Yes, I usually train with the soldiers in the castle. Occasionally, I would ask Lord Linda for guidance. Bernal replied respectfully. Very good. Viscount Fergus nodded in satisfaction. His gaze swept over Gray and the other 2. From now on, the 3 of you should pay more attention to battle training. Strength is important, but battle techniques are equally important. Only when strength and battle techniques coexist can you unleash your full potential. Yes,